falling in love can somewhat be a bit easy, but staying in love can feel like it's impossible. So what are the key things that we can start to look out for that can actually be indicators that maybe our relationship is in trouble?
I think some of us become really attracted to the hormones and the drama and the roller coaster that comes along with the honeymoon stage of love, I think is how we commonly think of it. And when it then transitions into a relationship or relationships that don't have those really high highs in the beginning, I think that's when challenge can occur, where we think we're bored, we think maybe this isn't the right person. So in terms of finding our way toward a kind of stable version of love, I think love does it feels calm, it feels grounded. There's a reciprocal give and take of support. There's space for individual self-expression. And of course, if you're not feeling that way in your relationships, if there's dramatic highs and lows or just dysfunctional patterns in general, or you don't feel safe to express yourself, your ideas, your perspectives, or to have your needs being met, chances are, again, there's nothing necessarily wrong with you, though you're likely repeating patterns that worked and that were adaptive for you at one time, but might not be serving you in this authentic relationship. So there's several different ways that emotions can lack space, can lack attention, and can result in not feeling that reciprocal give and take of support. And I think one of the most common ones is emotional invalidation, or all of the different moments where maybe we share, if we feel comfortable sharing what I'm feeling with the partner. And of course, this is beyond just romantic partners, with friends, with family members, pretty much in any relationship. And, maybe we're immediately met with words of we're being dramatic, or our emotions are minimized in other ways where it's simply denied. Gaslighting is a very common word. That didn't happen, or you don't feel that way, or you shouldn't feel that way. And I think all of those are really common things that many of us have gotten used to, because that maybe was the dynamic in our childhood home where there wasn't space, or we did hear from our caregivers that we were being too dramatic, or not to, express anger because it's inappropriate for whatever reason, or maybe just outright things were denied to us, when in reality we were feeling them and they were true in our bodies. Because I think being aware of what emotions are, that they actually are physiological sensations that are happening, and I think that opens the door for the validity of them, even if they're coming from an older story or an older experience that was quite similar to what's happening now. They are still living in our body and real, though, of course, within that space and within that self-awareness, once I learned to drop in and notice that my heart rate is getting elevated, or I'm feeling that clenching, sick feeling in my stomach that, might map onto some emotions, understanding, of course, that they might be coming from our past. They might be a remnant of a similar circumstance that we lived, or a similar experience that we lived. So saying that to say emotions are real, though it is our kind of job to distinguish between, okay, is this emotion coming because of the way my mind made sense of the story my mind told about what is happening, and then questioning the accuracy, right? Is this actually what's happening? Because our mind is always trying to make sense of what's happening around us, and it often isn't giving us an accurate representation. But not to say, again, that the feelings aren't alive for us. And I always just like to preface that, because I do think sometimes we think we have the expectation that the goal is not to feel things, to avoid our emotions entirely, or to think them away. And that's just simply not possible. So emotions are real wherever they're coming from. Dropping in our body, as you'll always hear me speak of, is going to be an important part of that journey.
All right, so take me through this scenario, and I'm going to play a bit of devil's advocate here, because if it's coming from your body, totally get that. Maybe it's from the past trauma that you've had, and so you show up in a relationship, and let's say somebody's saying you're being dramatic. The emotion of the drama, I understand, can be real, but then how do you identify whether your partner's trying to gaslight you, or whether you actually are being dramatic, and you then have to work through it with your partner to then maybe explain why that emotion is coming up? Like, where's that fine line between the reality and the emotion? And then how do you, as a partner, discuss that with your significant other?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what partners offer us, right, the possibility of what they could offer us, I should say, is an unblinded perspective, right? A different kind of vantage point on what's happening. So, right, just taking the dramatic example, right? An over emotional experience that might be colored by this past that's not really maybe mapping onto what's happening. So allowing in hearing, I think first and foremost, especially if it's coming from a trusted partner. Now I want to, again, preface this with not a stranger on the internet, not someone who's just giving their opinion about us. This is someone that, we have a sense of commitment to or relational security around. In those moments, right, taking their perspective and hearing and being curious, because it's never just defer to them, oh, I'm being dramatic, you must be, accurate in this. And then obviously taking what we know of our past experience and dropping into and, exploring for ourselves, well, okay, what is the story that went through my mind that mapped on to this big emotion in my body? And even if it does come to the conclusion that, okay, this was a past experience that is kind of coming out in this very big, over emotional way, it's not mapping on, doesn't mean it's any less real. So even in those moments, shifting perspective, allowing in what our partner shared with us, and also possibly asking for support, because we're still feeling the way that we're feeling, even if it isn't an accurate representation of what's happening. And I think some of us too, when we didn't have that space to have our space for our own perspectives, our own emotions in childhood, we could create a kind of dynamic that we bring into relationships where we don't trust ourselves to begin with. So it doesn't even have to be a function of the toxic or non-toxic person. There's a lack of validity that we don't even give to ourselves. We're always deferring. We're always outsourcing. We're always asking what someone else thinks or feels and then taking on their reality for how we should think and feel in any given circumstance. So I do think, and I touch upon this a lot in the book, relationships are co-created. Yes, of course, there might be people that are, using our reality or trying to manipulate our reality and our emotions, though I do think that often goes hand in hand with, right, the part we're playing at least being, we're not secure in what we think and what we feel. And I'm just speaking from my own lived experience of always deferring outward, always asking people for their opinions on certain things, always deferring to how I saw other people reacting emotionally in any given moment. And if I inherently wasn't naturally thinking or feeling that way, I would diminish my own intuition. And I would say, oh, Nicole, you must be, inaccurate here because no one else is upset by this. So almost shaming myself out of that. So I just always like to honor kind of both sides, because typically, again, there's a familiarity that we recreate from childhood. So if we were the child who didn't have that space, chances are we're not going to have that self-trust inherently, and we're going to continue then to create relationships that might allow in those manipulative behaviors.
So going to shaming, actually, thank you for bringing that up. I think that's a big part of what I hear from my audience a lot, where people feel that they're ashamed for having a certain emotional response with their partner. And so how do you advise someone like that in that situation to really put out boundaries and really recognize that I don't want to, I hate the word shouldn't, right? But really they shouldn't have any shame in their emotional response, but take the potential ownership over it.
I think even defining shame for what it is, and I'm saying this because there was a version of me that shame was so baked into how I learned to be in my relationships as this achievement-driven person that more or less had no emotional needs because I didn't have that attunement in my childhood, that I was acting in a way unconsciously to even avoid feeling anything shameful by presenting myself as someone who, wait, emotions, me? I'm good. I'm showing up in service of you. There's nothing going on. I'm fine. And it took me years to understand that I call it a conditioned self in the book. And I introduce this concept of all of these different kind of patterned ways that we show up as, for me, the overachiever. On the other side of that as the underachiever, as the, caretaker or the hero worshiper, this person who idealizes everyone. But a lot of us, we don't even notice that what we're feeling at its core is shameful. I'm too shameful to express my perspective. I'm too shameful to express my emotion. So instead, I don't know I'm even feeling shame because I just be someone who doesn't have those things. So I think defining the root, which for a lot of us, anytime again in childhood that we didn't have that space and the curiosity of someone else to understand us as a unique, different individual, a lot of times we modify ourselves out of that shame, this deep belief that I'm not worthy as I am, I'm not lovable as I am because of what was directly said, you're too dramatic, stop being like that, or what was indirectly done distance, withdrawal. The silent treatment's a big one when there's disappointment or when someone has a negative reaction. And before long, we register that enough that from that shameful place, this idea that, oh, who I am isn't worthy, I begin to modify. So I think understanding that for a lot of us, especially if we're not being who we are or really expressing our true nature or our true perspective or our true emotions, defining it is coming from a shameful place. And then, of course, the journey begins with creating, like you're beautifully saying, space and boundaries, which sometimes begins with my relationship with myself first. Before I can authentically share with you, Lisa, how I'm feeling, I have to be really connected with how I'm feeling. I have to rebuild, for many of us, a connection with my body so I can attune to all of those different physiological signals and get some clarity so that over time then I can work through the discomfort of maybe disclosing to you that, I'm feeling badly or I'm feeling in need of help or support or I'm feeling grief or whatever it is that I'm feeling. So, and then of course, boundaries become a conversation. Creating the space so I can self-explore is a set of boundaries, and then creating the space that I have now a choice point, because what we can't control is how someone will receive or not receive our self-expression, but what we can choose is how we keep ourselves safe regardless of what they do or don't do with the information. Then again, just to play the tape forward, right? If they use it against us, if they bring it up later to manipulate us, I know you talk about this often, right? If they explode and don't create a safe space for when we do want to share, then we can, of course, modify our behavior moving forward by sharing with a different person or by removing ourselves from an unsafe situation or a relationship entirely.
And also, I hear a lot of people often get mocked, right, for putting up the boundary in the first place, especially if you've already been in this dynamic. Maybe you've been in a relationship for a year or a while, and then you start to do the work internally. You really are noticing maybe some toxic dynamic between you and your partner. You're looking to improve it, so you're doing the self-work, and then you show up to try and improve it. But then often other people, if they haven't done the work, they're going to shame you for trying to create that space or create that boundary.
We all struggle with change. And the reality of it is, because we are dynamic, interdependent, interconnected creatures, this is why we see this oftentimes in families. It's so difficult when one person begins to think differently and do differently. Quite like dominoes, there is an impact. Whether it's with your romantic partner, your friend group, or within your family structure, everyone's kind of fallen into this pattern of relating. And now if one person's going to either question the status quo or the narrative, or even more so make a new choice to create change, then there is going to be an impact. And sometimes, because while we're wired to change and grow and evolve as species, as creatures, really, there is a drive to the familiar. Change inherently feels unsafe. So if you have a family dynamic or a relational dynamic where the other individuals struggle with, navigating their stress of change, their emotional reaction to now this new way of being, maybe even the fact that now you're challenging not only your own identity and the role you played, but perhaps their identity and what they come to know of the relationship, right? Now it can get really complicated, and people can have really big reactions, and sometimes it comes out as invalidating our change, as teasing. Oh, of course, what are you too good for us now that you can't come around as much or you're not available in these ways? So sometimes well-meaning teasing, or what people think is, oh, I'm just poking fun, is really their attempt at navigating their own discomfort that they're feeling when something is different in their world.
How do you then start to break that cycle? Because to your point, if you're just learning this and you're just practicing, maybe you've had past relationships where it's been a repetitive kind of cycle, and then, the toxicity, you leave, maybe you go back. But maybe you've realized now in this relationship that the signs that, okay, I need to do something different, it's not working, I really want to try and make this relationship work, what can I do? So you start to set these boundaries, and that person starts to reciprocate in either the exploding or they give you the silent treatment, because that becomes a manipulation tool that then someone uses in order for you to then drop that change that you were going to do, or drop that boundary, or stay in that relationship. How do you start to actually vocalize what you're doing? How do you address their, I want to say punishment, because it feels like that's a punishment. And then what would you advise someone does in that situation?
Well, I think I love actually that you intuitively started with vocalizing it, because we all struggle with change. Unexpected change is even more destabilizing. So if we do come to the awareness on our individual journeys that, I am going to, or I need to begin to show up differently in this relationship, it can be really helpful to actually directly communicate that, right? What my intention is and how I will navigate the circumstance or the relationship in its entirety differently. The caveat here being doing so not in an explosive moment, not when we're having an eruption because we can't take it anymore and or our partner is in their reactive cycle or in their disconnected or shut down cycle. Because anytime our nervous system is activated, that eruption being a sign of flight mode, scrolling around or needing to get to that work email, a sign of fleeing, being shut down entirely, that kind of silent treatment, a sign of that detacher or that disconnection mode. So when we're out of that state, and it sometimes isn't ideal. Oftentimes we want to communicate it in the heat of the moment, right? Well, I'm going to stop doing this now because I can't take it anymore. It would really benefit us to set the intention and communicate the intention at a calmer moment, because anytime our nervous system is activated, whatever side we're on, if we're the ones activated or if our partner is, we're not actually able to hear new information, and we're definitely not going to be able to integrate it or to accept it. So making that communication can go a long way. It can take at least the surprise out of now the next time that thing happens when you do show up differently, though it's not to say that it's going to completely eradicate that reaction, because the other individual, depending on what boundary we're putting up, because now a lot of us are talking about their own wounds too, right? Moments of when something similar happened or when their mind is telling them that they're being rejected now because you're now not as available. And rejection is real. I mean, again, we're wired to relate to others, to connect. And there's a lot of research that shows that when we're ostracized or actually rejected from our social group, that it activates the pain center in our brain. So now, of course, right, if I think or, I perceive your movement away, your new boundary, whatever it might be, your removal of yourself from a heated moment, if I perceive that as, oh, you're not leaving this moment, you're leaving me, right? Now, again, like dominoes, of course I'm going to have a big reaction, especially if I'm someone who in childhood was physically or was emotionally left. So communication of our intention, standing in that boundary, whatever it might be, even in, and I'm giving just all this information because sometimes knowing where a reaction is coming from, right? Even if it's someone saying something very unsavory to us or shutting us down and hurting us because they distance ourselves, sometimes having understanding that, oh, they're feeling threatened now because my new behavior is different. So that's going to inherently challenge them. It's change. Or if you know of their past, you might know that, okay, they might be feeling a rejection. And it's sometimes assuring them. If one of the boundaries you're setting is creating distance, especially if you know you have a partner that was physically or was emotionally abandoned in childhood, it might be really helpful to preface that, yes, you might be taking different space to explore yourself, to, kind of navigate your own emotions, to deal with your own stressful overwhelm or whatever it is. It might be helpful to offer a line of reassurance. It doesn't mean that I'm any less committed to you or to the relationship, but standing in your ground in that boundary as the embodied action of actually holding that boundary, even if there is explosion or disconnection, of course, within reason. If there's an explosive behavior, actually physically removing yourself is always helpful too.
Okay, yeah, because I was going to ask you, where's that fine line, though, between showing someone compassion for the trauma that they've had as a child and understanding, okay, this rage comes from a childhood wound, and so I understand, or even just they're having a really hard time at work, so I'm just going to be really understanding. But at some point, that rage is about their reactions towards you. And so it does become then verbal or emotional abuse. How do you start to process that where you're giving someone compassion? Because I think anybody that's suffering, it is true that they're suffering, but that doesn't excuse their behavior towards you.
Exactly. And so then with all of that being a fact, the best thing that we can do for ourselves is to maintain the boundary or remove ourselves from that circumstance. Because again, it's like a lot of times we want to demand things, especially of children, especially of someone who is acting in an abusive way to us, right? The instinct is to tell them to stop. Though again, if they're in this reactive, emotionally driven part of their brain, if that's the only way that they've learned to navigate these big, overwhelming feelings, then not only are they not going to be able to hear us, chances are they're not going to be able to do anything different because they still have, like we were talking about earlier, those emotions raging through their body, and they quite literally don't have an outlet, though it doesn't mean that we have to be their outlet. So the difference between like a boundary and an ultimatum or a demand really looks like, okay, you keep screaming and yelling abusive things. I'm actually going to remove myself from, I'm going to hang up the phone if it's on on a phone call, or I'm going to leave the room, or maybe I might have to leave the home entirely until you calm down or until there's, a more of an approach available. But I think keeping the focus on ourselves, which might mean for some of us, we come to the end of this journey and we do have to make difficult decisions to possibly leave or end relationships, especially if they've crossed that line into being abusive, because the only thing that we can do is protect ourselves. And sometimes that means removing ourselves, ending the relationship, and then letting room for all of the complicated feelings. I think this is another place where we shame ourselves. Right? If we're leaving an actively abusive relationship, whatever that looks like, I think a lot of us have this idea that I should feel nothing but relief on the other side of it, when in reality, I probably feel grief. I probably miss certain aspects of this relationship. Just because it ended, in an abusive manner doesn't mean that I still don't have a love or a care for this person. But it doesn't mean, because I used to make this mistake too. I used to over-understand where everyone was coming from and all of the reasons that they were treating me in dysfunctional or hurtful or even abusive ways at times. And I didn't leave any space for the impact that it had on me. I almost overrode how I felt about it because I tried to over-consider where they were coming from. And I really had to learn, because I didn't learn boundaries in childhood. I didn't learn how to navigate my emotions. I was actually taught that people do cause and are responsible for other people's emotions. So I took on all of this responsibility without saying, no, people act as they do, oftentimes not even anything connected to me at all, connected to their own past experience. And yet it is still my responsibility to create that safety for myself.
What up, homie? I got something free and new to share with you right now.
How often are you visited by that negative voice in your head telling you that you're not smart enough, that you're not good enough, experienced enough, not fill in the blank? One of the most powerful things you can learn to do in life is to turn that negative voice into your bestie. And I want to teach you how to do that and so much more in my 4 steps to becoming confident workshop. And guys, the most amazing thing is you can actually register for completely free for this workshop. So click the link on your screen and I'll see you on the inside. Oh, okay, so much there. All right, so first of all, I want to say, in those moments, a lot of people, instead of staying true to their boundary, they'll start to make themselves smaller.
Yes.
And I've heard you really talk about how that can be just like a huge sign that actually there's a potential resentment within that relationship, and that can be something that can really break you. And then when I speak to so many people in my audience that I talk to, they always say that making themselves smaller, it feels right in the moment, right? It's like, well, if I just don't press their buttons, then everything's going to be good. Because to your point, there's still potentially that love or that infatuation or that connection with that person that you don't want to lose. So instead of just leaving or standing firm on your boundary, very often you just like, if I don't rustle their feathers, everything will be fine. But that becomes a stepping stone over time to you not recognizing who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. And that I can make a case, this tendency to squash ourselves, suppress ourselves, make ourselves small, was actually a nervous system trauma response, typically at a time where we were adapting. There was a value in being so attuned to maybe our caregiver. We talked a little bit about, inconsistently present caregivers, right? So really being attuned to when they were there and what their needs might be in that moment to keep them there. Or if we had an explosive caregiver, right? Noticing any shift or change in their mood and then squashing down anything that we could do to upset them. Or maybe we had a completely withdrawn caregiver, as my mom was quite often, right? Becoming so attuned to what allowed her to move a bit closer. And for me, that was achievement. So I became, as we call it, our nervous system, hypervigilant. I became so focused. And a lot of times we call that, well, I'm just empathetic. I just feel the world around me. And absolutely, we're all feeling energetic creatures. Our nervous system is always assessing the state of someone else, but some of us have done that to overcompensate. So then we do see that in our adult relationships as being like, oh, well, I just won't say that because I know that upsets this person, or, oh, I won't do this, or I'll do more of this because I know that this makes them happy, to the extent that we end up watering ourselves down completely. And we wake up in some day not only feeling resentful of the world around us, but we wake up not even really knowing who it is that we are and what it is that we even want or need.
Yeah, God, that's heartbreaking. And then the other thing that you said of the vicious, almost the vicious cycle, you didn't use those words, but the vicious cycle of when you're leaving, I think there is this contradictory feelings that a lot of people have, where you're like, they were dismissive of me, they were, like you were saying before, they were emotionally invalidating towards me. And so I felt like I had to leave. But when you leave, you end up almost forgetting that part of why you left, and all you remember is the love, or that one moment, that beautiful time that you once had a few years ago that you're just holding on to and like, see, they are a good person. How do you start to break that cycle?
Yeah, and I think that's a really common one. Like we either overfocus on the negative when we're stuck in it, and then when we're out of it, I think there can be a tendency to idealize these small pieces of a person, or again, back in time, maybe at this honeymoon period where things looked and felt differently. So again, as all things, I think it's noticing that you are kind of doing that and over highlighting, because again, our mind at any point, our brain is has too much information to deal with, has too many possibilities, narratives, explanations. And really we are focusing, typically again, based in our beliefs, what we learned in childhood to focus on, we're highlighting like a spotlight, certain aspects of our experience. So we have the ability, once we notice we're doing that, so becoming conscious of what you keep ruminating or thinking about is this one positive time, and what you're not thinking about, right, is all of these other times. So when you notice that you're engaging with that habit, of course, not to shame yourself, it's what our brain naturally does, to tend to all of the information, but then you could begin to widen your focus and consciously ground yourself, while not minimizing how you're feeling, because likely there still will be grief and loss, and chances are your world will change in some way. Here's an individual that you're maybe sharing a house with, sharing a space with, sharing a relationship with, and now they're not there. Maybe part of it is your own identity, right? I'm only used to, right, being in service of someone else, and now I'm alone. So there's still grief, very real emotions there, though we can expand those blinders a bit, just to keep using that analogy, when we notice that we're hyperfixating on one of the parts. And I think a lot of us, the way we've even learned who we are in childhood, often begins how we had to be to connect with those core caregivers that we needed the most, right? And however it is, and that's how we begin to ingrain these beliefs, right? Well, I am the caretaker of my family, because maybe in childhood we did have to show up in care of a parent if we were parentified, in care of siblings, if maybe for financial reasons our parents couldn't be physically present and we were the oldest sibling, right? So now it becomes who we are, how we serve others. So leaving relationships really, comes with different levels of grieving, of a grieving process. And a lot of us, especially if we've only known ourselves in a relationship, I speak to a past version of myself who was serially in relationship after relationship. Since I started dating at age 16, I really didn't spend more than a handful of months outside of a partnership of some kind. So when I did make the commitment after I left my marriage to spend time alone, to live alone, that was a big reorganization, because I didn't have that kind of identity wrapped up in a relationship. So that was when I was first beginning to grapple with, well, who am I as me? And of course, that was really then enhanced when I made the decision to step away from my family for the better part of 18 months, because and that was one of the big reasons why I decided to put up that hard boundary and take space, because I only knew myself in relation to my family of origin. So creating space creates opportunities to grieve how we know ourselves, and also the whole, I think, that is left with our desire to be in connective experiences with another person.
So is the fact that for you didn't want to be alone because of that connection with your family, because there's also the other side where I hear when someone's had either a bad relationship, they're like, I'm never going to be with anyone again. Right. And so you've got the two sides where someone's so fearful of being alone that they hop from one bad relationship to the other. But then you have somebody else who has just had a bad relationship and they just swear off ever being in love again. How do we start to work through the experience of dating to find the right person versus being one or the other?
Yeah, and to speak to your point of kind of swearing off relationships entirely, right? If love and relating ended in wounding, then I think it's a very logical, kind of proclamation to make. Why would I want to, right? Especially if the hurt came from our original relationships, right? If we were really hurt in our core family, why would we want to make ourselves vulnerable and expose ourselves to that possibility? Because our mind and body, even if we're decades past what had once happened to us, we're still living the memory of it. It's still wired into us. So even if we don't kind of actively bring up what happened, and many of us try to avoid bringing up what happened because it's too painful, it doesn't mean that we're still not a memory of it, wired, looking for the possibility. And for some of us, that means just swearing off any possibility of relationship with another person, because that's the only way that we can feel safe enough. Though, again, we're at odds because we still need people to some extent. So even in this act of self-protection, I think we are left with that feeling of loneliness and all of then the impact that comes around with it. So again, kind of finding our way into what do I want? What do I need? Even if we're in an active relationship, understanding that we still can and need to, I would say, create space to be an individual within that relationship.
And what about conflicts? I've actually heard you say that conflict actually can be quite good in a relationship, but we've been so taught that if you fight, that it means, oh, your relationship's in trouble.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us, again, we learn how we learn to engage in conflict, whether it's appropriate or not, or natural or not, really comes from those first experiences with conflict. And there's many families that sweep things under the rug, avoid emotional topics. And that might be what we then continue to do with this idea that talking about anything that's difficult or uncomfortable, let alone engaging in a conflict, is to be avoided at all cost. Or we might have been around explosive conflicts where they could have even ended in violent, physically violent altercations. So of course now what we're going to want to avoid is conflict, though conflict itself is a natural byproduct of two unique individuals trying to navigate life. I mean, we have different perspectives, different life experiences. We are going to have different emotional experiences to any given thing that's happening in our world, and trying to understand that together, having moments where we don't agree, and trying to then plan and negotiate a future that serves both of us. Inherently, there's going to be a moment where we aren't on the same page, or there is conflict. Though becoming aware of what your relationship with conflict is. If you are still someone to sweep it under the rug, or maybe even avoid sharing things that upset you, never even telling someone that there is a problem, which is what I did for very many years, because I was so afraid that conflict would end in what it ended in my mom, removing her love and connection, which also then meant any moment of distance, I would automatically assume it's because someone was upset or in conflict, when in reality, people could take distance in a relationship for a million different reasons that, like you were saying earlier, a bad day at work, that have nothing to do with me at all. Yet ultimately that space will indicate conflict. So exploring, is there conflict? How comfortable do you feel navigating conflict? Does it become eruptive and explosive, or do you become shut down to it? And again, not to shame any of that awareness that you might find, because again, that's typically a state of nervous system. If I don't feel safe engaging in difficult feelings, expressing difficult feelings, navigating these moments of disagreement, then my nervous system will take over, and I'll end up screaming and yelling, or distancing myself, or saying, no, nothing's wrong. What do you mean? I'm fine. And pretending that something isn't actually wrong when it is.
And so being honest in those moments, obviously always assuming that you trust that person to be honest and saying, this is why this is coming up for me, instead of like kind of crossing your arms. would you advise in that? Like discussing with your partner your mode of the way that you deal with conflict.
Yes, I think, the more aware we can be and the more aware we can share, or the more we can share that awareness outside of these conflictual moments, and the more attuned we can be to when our partner is reacting from that stressed place, that conflict place, or might be perceiving conflict. And I talk a lot about in the book different markers, different things we can notice in ourselves and in other people, right? Those explosions, the tendency to always pick up my phone and kind of distract myself when uncomfortable conversations happen, or to shut down completely. We'll see those same behaviors in our partners. And the more we know about our general conflict style, the more then we can equip both people to navigate those moments. But that's not to say it's still important to have a conversation at a grounded time later, to explore whatever the disagreement was, or the differing perspective was, or the combating desires were, and to come up with a negotiation or a way that we will move forward that can be of service when possible to both of us. So essentially it's learning new conflict skills in our adulthood to navigate those moments of disagreement. But first we have to know what we're already doing habitually so that we can begin to create space, which means then navigating difficult conversations sometimes, hearing difficult things shared by your partner, maybe even having to navigate having different wants and needs in any given moment, and trying to find a path forward that can again be of service when possible to both of you.
I've got a quote of yours that really lays out when this comes up. You can possibly say this to your partner as a line: I need reassurance after a conflict to feel safe. Can you remind me that you still love me even when you're upset?
Yeah, that again, for those of us who either conflict was explosive and maybe we heard quite the opposite, that we're not loved, that, things might have been told to us in those moments that we're good for nothing, get out of the house, right? All of these kind of rejection-based language, and or like I experienced the removal of someone that we love and need in those moments. So those words can, again, when spoken and the plan coming, or being communicated outside of those moments, can go a long way if you are then in that moment of discomfort because, there is upset for whatever reason, or there is disconnection for whatever reason, to hear that assurance if your partner is able to offer you that, and or if you're able to offer that to your partner, can go a long way. Now, of course, it's not going to immediately remove the discomfort that you're feeling. And I just want to reiterate that, because sometimes these words are very relieving. And then other times it's, well, I'm still feeling really nervous. I'm still feeling really uncomfortable with what's happening with you. I'm still feeling like I want to connect with you and you're not available for me now, right now. What do I do? So we're still then left to contain or to navigate however it is that we're feeling, which is why I think it's so important to make sure that we have support, not only within ourselves, how to navigate big uncomfortable emotions when someone isn't available, we learn how to self-soothe, but also that we have supportive relationships outside of our primary partners. I think a lot of us put an expectation that one person be ever available and be everything. And that's not humanly possible. So finding the friendships, finding the community, finding the support in a helping professional, either somewhere else to go when we're living with that upset, if and when our primary person can't be available for whatever reason.
That's so strong. And then, because what I love about that is that you're vocalizing your need. You're not kind of passing the problem onto them. Like you really are almost like taking ownership over, like, this is where I am right now. But this is what I need in order for this conflict for us to work, so that I can hear that you actually love me. But in that moment, when you're vocalizing your need, I don't like to test my partner, but I would like to say in that moment, it is a nice way of seeing how they're going to show up for you. Do they dismiss you and be like, well, that's ridiculous? Now you can kind of almost think, is that somebody that I want to be with who just dismisses my needs? And there's no guesswork, because I think also a lot of us try to guess either what the other person wants, or well, they should know. They should know that I've had this trauma in my past, and they should know that I have, detachment issues, and that they should tell me that they love me. But unless you're saying it, they're never going to know. But in saying it, it gives them the opportunity to either show up for you or not.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I have been a victim to my own they should know beliefs. I walked through many relationships with this idea that the right person would just know, would know how to attune to me, would know what I'm feeling in any given moment or what I need in any given moment, would anticipate that even more so, and would show up in service of this unspoken need, not to realize that how should they know? They come from a different lived experience. And just like when hearing about, you could share an experience that's somewhat similar to something I went through. And what's going to naturally happen is I'm going to relive the experience as I experienced it, right? So I'm going to say, oh, that was so sad when that happened. When in reality, if I were to ask you how it was, I might not hear sad. I might hear a completely different emotion or a completely neutral. So naturally, we're painting our perspective onto other people, and we then can easily fall into that assumption that other people are in our mind, right, doing the same thing and knowing our exact experience. But the reality of it is none of us are mind readers. It again comes from this childhood state of dependency where our parents, our caregivers, whoever they were our be-all, end-all. It actually was their job to attune and to figure out how we were feeling and to help us explore how we were feeling. And a lot of us retain that kind of developmental immaturity and thought and continue. And I'm been guilty of it myself. So I'm absolutely saying, like, I'm not beyond that. And we do have then this cycle of, well, you should just know. But they won't know. They will only know from what they experience. And if they didn't have that experience, they have no idea how to know. And they even could have had something similar and it might not have felt the way that it felt for you. Or their way to feeling better might be something completely different than your way to feeling better. So getting curious, anytime you do notice that idea that they should know, assume that they don't. Make that communication anyway. And anytime you're assuming you know how someone else must feel, instead of assuming, asking, getting curious, well, how was that for you? Or how is that for you? Or what do you need to happen? Even if you think you know your partner, you really might get surprised sometimes that what you thought they needed was not actually what they needed at all.
I love that. And your book is so amazing. And I love how you talk about, there's so much like ownership in it and how you show up in the relationship. And so even everything that we're talking about now in vocalizing your needs, you even say in your book, just because you also say your needs, I can't remember the exact words, but it's like, don't pretend that may not go against their authentic self. And I was like, oh.
Yeah, I talk a lot about it. And while this is a relationship book, it really is built on the foundation of, for a lot of us, knowing and exploring ourselves and what our needs are. For the first time, this might be the first shift of focus from, well, wait a minute. It's not about just me showing up in service of everyone around me and what everyone wants and needs. It's actually about me too in this relationship. And how can I get so attuned to what it is that I want or what I need in any given moment. And of course, not shame myself if I don't yet have that awareness. And then for a lot of us, it means, can I get curious and explore then how I need to meet my needs? Because if we didn't learn in childhood, or we learned a habitual way, some attempt we're making, but if it isn't in service of actually helping us feel good, helping us feel connected to other people, then we could do some unlearning. So for a lot of us, it's really getting curious about what it is that I want and need first, how it is then that I could receive support in a relationship, which will be uncomfortable if we're not used to receiving that support in a relationship. And the reality might be, you might not be on the same page. For whatever reason, the person might not be willing or able, or they might have a different vision for what they want their relationship or their future to look like. So I think, again, the more we can have these conversations early on in a developing relationship, though, of course, it's not to say that if you're in a current long-term relationship that we can't start to build that awareness now. Though I think that a lot of conversations that we avoid in the beginning are out of fear. I don't want to tell someone how I really want a relationship to look like. I don't want to tell someone about my past because of what they'll think. I don't want to tell someone about my childhood, right, because of what they'll think. I don't want to share what it is that I want for my future in a relationship, because if they don't want it, then what will that mean? I think those are the really important conversations to begin early on, because the reality might be there might be a misalignment. Someone might want a family structure that isn't something that you want for yourself. Someone might want to live in a way or in a location that isn't what was in your own future. So again, having that awareness, though, begins with us, empowering ourselves, that to make sure our needs are met in a relationship, that means that we have to be really clear on what they are. And we have to be really clear on what we want. And then we have to be really clear in communicating that and really comfortable then with the possibility that the goal wouldn't be to contort ourselves into what someone else's vision is. It might actually be to create a different dynamic with that person or to separate.
Yeah, because that's what I was going to say. Because if you're vocalizing your needs, you've done the deep work, you're vocalizing it, you're really open, you're curious, you're asking questions, you're trying to build this dynamic with a partner, and their needs completely are the opposite to yours or conflict with your needs. Now it's, you don't want to be necessarily the person that backs down, because going over everything that you said, right, making yourself smaller just to fit into this relationship isn't going to serve you long term at all. But then the same goes for your partner. You don't want them to start making themselves smaller and minimize their needs just to make you feel like your needs are important.
Absolutely. And that's not to say that there isn't a negotiation, a give and take, right? A moving of, a delaying of gratification of a need in a moment, right? Because there are at times a partner that, is more in a need of emotional support and a partner that might be more available to give it. And then those roles might reverse in a future. And this comes up a lot when I think a tendency that often comes up in conflict, again, in terms of communication, which is this transactional nature or this kind of scorekeeping, right? Where I'm like, well, I'm not going to do this for you if you don't do this for me, or you did this last time and I'm just reminding you of this because now you're telling me of something I did wrong. Yeah, well, you do it too. I think we really have to relinquish that there is a reciprocity and it's not always going to be equal in any given moment. Though, of course, getting really clear on what our non-negotiables are of the areas that we're not willing to compromise, something that's authentically true to us or some space that we want in our relationship to express something, to have separate hobbies, or something that we're really clear on in terms of a family structure, wanting kids, not wanting kids, wanting to define a marriage versus not. Where we want to live. I just keep kind of reiterating these things that might be a more non-negotiable. But in the world of kind of emotional support, I do think that there's more of a flow, a give and take. It doesn't always feel like when I need it or when you need me, I can be on. Because if I don't have the resources available and if I have a whole lot going on in my work or in my family or in a different relationship entirely or within this relationship and I'm just overwhelmed, then to expect me to be present, even if you desperately want me to be, is going to be not only impossible, but it's going to build that resentment. But that's not to say that somewhere down the line, right, now the roles have switched and now I am available. But if you're not getting kind of that give and take over time, not in a given moment, then I do think that is something to explore. If you're always on the giving end of support and the person's never available or can't meet your needs in maybe a different way, I think we can get really focused on having needs met in one way and we can lose sight, like we were talking about earlier, where we're kind of selecting what we're looking at. And this came up a lot in my relationship with Lolly because I was so focused on my needs being met in a very kind of caretaking way of having food on the table, my dinner ready. And my mom was that's how my mom loved me, making sure my dinner was ready and my clothes were washed at all times. And when Lolly didn't naturally do that in our relationship, I very quickly lost sight of all of the other ways that she was caring for me and our shared relationship and reality together because I became so hyper-focused on an expectation built in childhood that wasn't being met. So I think, again, this whole conversation comes together when we expand kind of our awareness. We might see many moments where we are being supported. It might not just look like what we're expecting in any given moment.
And almost like defining the language and the acts because of how that makes you feel. Because I remember Tom would, throws his socks on the floor and just leaves his dirty plate. And like growing up in a Greek family where it's like you eat, you pick up your plate, you tidy. Like I actually perceived that to be disrespectful. Yes. And it wasn't until we had the conversation and the communication of like, this feels really disrespectful. I would just get upset. Yeah. But I was like, I can't believe it, But then over time, I was just like, this is really disrespectful. And he was shocked because he's like, what do you mean? Like from where I come from, like in my household, why would I take time to pick up my socks if I can spend time with you? Right. And it'll be beautiful. Then it's like chills, almost your interpretation of those things and what disrespect means to you versus what disrespect means to that person.
Absolutely. I'm really happy you shared that as a common one because I would explode when I would come home from work, usually later than Lolly, so she would be home. If the dishes weren't done, if there wasn't my hot dinner on the table exactly like what I saw growing up and what I received growing up, I would explode or shut myself in the the room and say nothing's wrong when it was. And what I came to learn is not only in her own childhood, they did not have shared meal times. Everyone fended for themselves. So she's like, what do you mean? We sit together and we eat the same thing? That's never anything I've ever done in any relationship. More so, her mom was very hyper-reactive when she did not do things as her mom expected, when her room wasn't tidy, when she did leave a dish out. So now I'm enacting more or less, not even knowing it, because I'm so hurt, because she's my language, and not disrespect, she's not considering me and what I need, which is my hot dinner and the dishes done, right? I'm actually in my explosive moment because my feelings are hurt, not to invalidate how I was feeling, because that was real. I'm actually creating her own kind of cycle of trauma because she's going right back to her childhood where her mom is yelling at her and she's sitting there dumbfounded because, again, like Tom, in many ways, she was excited to tell me about her day and hear about my day, and I'm yelling about the dishes that aren't done. So we were completely mismatched. And I just like to highlight both sides of it, because what felt very crappy, I know for me, when those things weren't done, I'm sure for you, when you're being disrespected by the socks on the floor, feels just as crappy when we're having a reaction that our partners can't make sense of, or that's going against what they're seeing or what their intentions or their actions are indicating otherwise.
Yeah, that's so powerful. And I think you call it in your book, you witness your conditioned self, and you tell the story of Mona. So talk to me about that, where she is interpreting the entire scenario in one way, and then actually it's not that.
Yeah, and again, what our interpretations, let's just start there, are based in the most frequent interpretations that our childlike mind made sense of our earliest experiences. And right, so then we assign all of these meanings. Like I was sharing earlier, we learn about who we are, we learn about who others are, we learn about what behaviors or lack of behaviors mean. And then, because we are driven to those familiar pathways in our brain, we don't come up with new scenarios, we revisit those old ideas. So what a conditioned self is kind of the neurobiological manifestation, or this entire way of being that is for a lot of us wired in our nervous system, and it's dysregulation and these cycles of emotional addiction we were talking about, right? These highs and lows, and I've become so familiar with these highs and lows that this is just my, my cocktail of neurotransmitters, of hormones, and my familiar. And so that's what a conditioned self simply is my entire way of being that has become so familiar to me, down to the ingrained beliefs that I have about me and my relationships, that then become those filters that I'm dropping over what's happening. So Mona, and I give many different story examples within the book of illustrating all the different conditioned selves, but they are simply this idea that we're recreating our past in absence of it being our present moment. And we're seeing through the filter of what happened and what we believe to be true, we're seeing in our partner's actions and our inactions exactly, and we're feeling more so in our body, exactly what once was, even if it's not the case at all.
And so by identifying your conditioned self from the get-go, is that becomes the foundation that you can then use as a compass?
That becomes, I think, whenever we can become conscious of our way of being, we allow ourselves to take that second step to create change, which is beginning to change that dynamic, right? Putting up the boundary, not watering down or suppressing what I really think or what I really feel and saying it, or whatever it might be. We give ourselves that ability to make a choice. And again, I want to be really intentional here, because becoming aware that we have a conditioned self, or, we are the overachiever in a relationship, or the underachiever who shrinks ourselves down, or the caretaker who's always in service of someone else. Those are three of them. Becoming aware of it isn't going to stop that pattern from happening, right? We're going to feel compelled. Our mind's going to tell us we should show up in this way because, again, that's the belief that's coming to play. We're going to feel at times like we can't resist and we can't stop doing that same thing, shrinking ourselves or, overstepping our boundaries to do something for someone else. So it's becoming aware. The conditioned self doesn't go away immediately, though over time making new choices, which again often include navigating our body and all of those emotions and calming down those dysregulated moments. Over time, we can create a new habit. But I do think a lot of us have the idea that the awareness is okay, I'm an overachiever, I'll just stop being that. And in reality, that isn't the case. It's actually the daily practice of creating a new habit where over time then that doesn't become the case. So very much I still have all of those habits wired in. Actually, a funny little aside that you and I were sharing in terms of guilt and feeling bad and me feeling like a burden came up when you and I were having a text earlier, right? And I was saying I had this whole created story of having spoken something without having run it by you first, even though you've told me on multiple occasions it's totally okay. Like, this is open, this is welcome. And in my mind, because I have, again, this idea that I'm a burden and no one actually wants to be there and show up in, kind of reciprocal support of me, I was kind of going down that same conditioned way of being, like, who am I to want or need something from somebody? And oh my God, I've upset Lisa. And oh my gosh, and I spent all this time feeling guilty and bad, even in absence of any reason to believe. I mean, you've actually told me the complete opposite.
Yeah.
You even texted me the complete opposite, affirming that there was no reason for me to feel bad. And yet my guilt is still there because there's still that very conditioned part of me that feels bad having wants and needs in a relationship, having them expressed, having space for them expressed, but alone having someone receive them and meet them. So I just wanted to use that example because I think it very much applies to everything we're talking about. It doesn't go away, but what I've learned to do is become present to it, to navigate my feel bads without saying, no, it's fine, I won't, and to actually receive the support and the love and the connection that you so generously offer me.
Oh, I mean, ditto. We're literally doing the same. I'm like, I'm so sorry that, no, I was going to say I was sorry. So why are we both apologising? Neither of us feel badly about either. So it's like, it's all good. I love that. But the story with Mona that I really love, because I'm always, again, trying to play like almost devil's advocate and think about what that other scenario is and then how people navigate it. So Mona, I believe, had like a childhood wound where if someone didn't answer her or get back to her, she felt like rejected. And so she's dating this guy, she's married to a guy, and she ends up, I think, texting him, is that right? Like texts him, he doesn't get back. And so she's like, oh my God, is he upset with me? So then she likes calling him and he's not answering. And so like she's wondering, does she do like the drive-by to go see if his car's there? And like, it's just escalated in her mind about like, he's abandoned me, he's cheating on me, like all these negative thoughts are going in her head. And then it turns out the poor guy's phone died. And so, it going straight to voicemail or, him not texting back, for him seems very normal, but for her, she's got this whole story in her head about what just happened. So taking that story, understanding what you were saying, right? She sees herself, she understands her habits, she understands why she's like that, and then tries to pause to then take stock to then potentially, hopefully in the future, when that happens, process that, hey, there's probably a reason, this is your childhood wounds coming up. What happens though, and we kind of touched on this earlier, but I'd like to go a little deeper. What happens though when you're with somebody that actually ends up using that as a manipulation tactic to then say, you're just being paranoid. And now here they are actually using what you've said to them as their means to be able to manipulate you, or I hate to say it and jump straight to it, but potentially cheat on you or, abuse that trust.
Yeah, actually, it's bringing up a past relationship that I had myself several relationships ago. I was getting kind of an internal ping that there, was possibly something going on actually with my partner at the time and a friend of ours. And the whole time I was like having this like kind of gut intuition. I was like sensing a distance between myself and my partner at that time. I was watching their dynamic. And I very bravely and courageously, brought it up on several occasions, and it was actually met with some version of, you're crazy, that's not what's happening, why are you being nuts? And I, again, not having that security in my own instincts, I deferred, okay, I must be crazy, this must be my own stuff coming up. So again, I think the deeper part of this conversation is creating the space for not only that connection to your intuition, but the ability to validate yourself, even if what you're hearing is the opposite, right? Even if it's being denied or you're being lied to or you're trying to be manipulated, is being so kind of confident in what it is that you feel and what the reality is for you, that even when someone is outright telling you that's not the case, that you can kind of rest assured that there is a reason to trust what it is that you're feeling. Because again, when it comes to especially approaching someone, in a cheating circumstance or, around difficult conversations, especially if this person isn't used to having hard conversations, or maybe they don't even want to admit to themselves the truth of what they're doing, let alone, right, admit to you, and feel the shame that would come with what it means now for the relationship. You might not always be met with the truth. Some people really do struggle to speak the truth, as my partner at that time did. It turned out that I was right, and somehow after the relationship, they ended up, they're married now, so good for them. And again, they made sense, and it wasn't about, kind of the nature of their relationship. It was about me in that moment overriding. So I want to continue to put the focus. I overrode my instinct. I had that ping time and time again. And instead of trusting myself when I knew that to be true, right, I trust it because I didn't have that practice of validating myself, of standing in my own feelings, of listening. We all have that deeper sensation. There are so many moments where we have those pings of what we know to be true, but we've just learned to squash it down or to believe what someone else is telling us. So I think even in those instances, again, while we don't choose for someone to be unfaithful to us or to do something harmful in our relationship, I think how we can empower ourselves is to begin to rebuild that trust in that inner guidance and the ability to validate ourselves, even if someone is telling us that we're paranoid and that isn't the case.
How do you then rebuild that trust within yourself? And then secondly, how do you actually differentiate between gut intuition and your conditioning?
Yeah, really great question. So rebuilding that trust within yourself builds, again, with rebuilding for many of us the connection to our physical body, where we've become distracted by the endless achievement, by the endless relationships that we have to tend to. We become so outward focused. So really refocusing our attention, attuning to our body, attuning to our emotions. It also means developing the ability to deal with our emotions. Because what a lot of us confuse intuition for is our nervous system being dysregulated and these habitual patterns, right? So to be able to attune to our intuition means to be able to feel comfortable enough to even drop our attention inward into stillness, to attune to, right, those feelings in my gut or in my heart, those pings, oftentimes, right, those deeper sensations or just inner knowings. All of that assumes, right, that my attention is internal. And for a lot of us, when we're dysregulated, I know for me, for many years, I didn't feel safe in stillness. I avoided meditation for a very long time because sitting still wasn't something that my body was comfortable with doing. There was too many emotions and too much nervous system dysregulation. So creating the connection to our body helps us attune. And I go through all of the different signs of, being stuck in cycles of dysregulation, where my heart rate's always elevated, where my muscles are always tense or I'm always clenched, where my breathing is always labored, right? As I start to attune to the signals that my body is stressed, then I can get a bit clearer that those sensations are coming from those older habitual patterns, not from my deeper sense of intuition, because intuition speaks when we're calm, when we're in a state of grounded presence, when we're breathing calmly and deeply from our belly, when our muscles are relaxed, when our shoulders are turned back, right? When our heart rate isn't pounding out of our chest. And these are probably things that listeners might not ever feel at this point, though we can create, again, the safety in our body so that we can shift that focus of attention and then begin to attune to those signals. When we have the ability to tolerate more and more stress, we can go from stress to calm, to regulate it, to dropping in. And then when we begin to it's a lived experience, rebuilding trust. When we begin to listen to those signals and act on those signals, then over time, the byproducts will be something that we can trust. It doesn't just happen. We don't just, self-trust, and now I have it. It really is an integrated process that, again, begins, of course, with our body and with our nervous system.
I love that so much. And without really kind of knowing, having the eloquent words that you just put to it, I started to realize I was really just ignoring my gut instincts all the time, and I wasn't tapping in. But also I was worried that I was going to my conditioned self, and that my beliefs of why something was happening was based on just past beliefs that I had as a child. And so I was finding myself ignoring my gut instincts, but I wasn't sure if it was because I was conditioned to ignore them or I was conditioned to believe that it was true, if that made sense. So what I started to do is I actually just started to take inventory of my intuition. And then over time, start to see whether my intuition was right or wrong, and then start to assess. And I think it really did come down to starting to listen versus keep going.
Yeah. I'm smiling. I actually had an example yesterday. I knew I was going to kind of the Venice area to record a podcast, and I happened to look at my flip-flops on my way, like in my bag on my way out. And I had a little bag packed, and for some reason I noted flip-flops, and then I thought, well, okay, well, I'm not wearing my flip-flops. I'm wearing these very fancy, sparkly shoes. So I went to the podcast. Long story short, after the podcast, I had some time, and I was like, oh, I'm in Venice. I'm going to go to the beach. And these shoes are comfortable enough, but not very comfortable for walking, definitely not beach shoes. And I thought, oh my God, that's why I pinged my flip-flops. How much I would love to have my flip-flops right now. And I didn't. I overrode in that small micro moment. But to speak to your point, we can attune. When are we overriding? And there's so many different weird signals that we get in any given day. But that just being a really silly one. There was some reason, right, that my eye caught flip-flops when I was getting ready. It was knowing on some level that they would be helpful later. And I thought, oh, it was weird. Well, I don't need to be looking at those, and completely overrode my instinct to want my flip-flops. And all I would have wanted later was my flip-flops.
Right. Now imagine how many times we do that within a relationship, where we just override some sort of idea or gut intuition about a partner or potential someone that you're dating.
Oh my gosh, I'm sure too, even from the beginning. And I think a lot of it happens when we're so focused on, do they like us? Are they going to want to go out with me another time? Are they enjoying what I'm saying right now? Do they think I'm funny? Do they think I'm attractive, right? All of that focus is not on me, right? So how are we ever going to attune to, well, how do I feel sitting across from them? Do I think they're attractive? Do I think they're funny? Do I want to go out with them again, right? And that's just a huge, I think, shift in focus. And many of us aren't primed to look inward first. We're primed to see how we're being assessed or desired, especially when dating, by someone else, instead of, and if I think we were beginning to drop into ourselves, we would not only get indicators of whether or not we think they're attractive and want to see them again, right? We might actually get other pings that, something they're saying is bringing up a red flag or a cause of concern. And we are, I think, not hearing them quite often. And another handful of times we're hearing them, but we're overriding them for whatever reason. We're logiking our way out of them, or we're talking ourselves out of them for whatever reason.
And so I love, by the way, the title of your book is so amazing. And do you think that, like, how to be the love you seek then gives you that foundation to then bring someone into that dynamic with yourself that can then complement, versus you're looking for something that is more external?
Oh, I think 100%. I think when we attune to ourselves, when we peel back, right, all of these layers of conditioning, when we learn how to regulate through difficult emotions and navigate conflict and difference of opinion, and are able to be in self-trust and self-security, I think not only do we open up space and safety and security to get to know someone else authentically, where we're not domineering, controlling, and directly manipulating them in some way, right? We're actually just receiving who they are. And then I think absolutely the natural byproduct of that becomes a safer, secure, more authentic relationship in and of itself.
And do you advise that people do that whenever possible, before they enter a relationship then?
I think that, wherever, I'm imagining many people are in a relationship, I think change can begin at any moment. And again, it can begin with just first exploring we have to see where we're at before we can create where we want to go. And I think there's so much to explore in any given relationship at any time, from what are the conditioned narratives or those beliefs, those thoughts running through your head? What are the, habitual emotions that you tend to cycle in relationships? How do you navigate those emotions? What's your relationship with conflict? I think everything we've been exploring here today can be explored, whether it's within your relationship with yourself, because you're not in a relationship, though, again, chances are you're relating with friends, with colleagues, with family. Even if you're not in a romantic relationship, there's probably some interpersonal, aspect of your life. And typically the same habits are probably present across the board. Or if you are in relationships, I think becoming present and then gradually making those new choices to shift the dynamic, communicating them, of course, to the partner that it might impact, can help you create an incredible amount of change, and can shift, as I did with Lolly, from very much a dysfunctional trauma bond, habitual patterning, where we're, again, pinging off each other, like I was sharing earlier, around the dishes or that or this or that, into a much more calm, grounded, secure relationship.
And so did that require you both having to do the work separately and then coming together? Because I'm just trying to picture, like, somebody listening right now is like, oh my God, okay, I've got to read the book. I love everything you guys are saying. I'm going to go do that in my relationship. But if your partner isn't on that same wavelength, if they're not thinking the way you are, they're not trying to go inwards and see their dynamic, their conflict styles and all of that, how do you navigate that?
I think incredible change can happen when we focus on creating that safety and security. I have several ending chapters around the concept of co-regulation and the power of our heart. And the more grounded and safe we feel, the more, again, those unseen signals that we're sending out to the world. So unlike coming home and yelling and stressed out about my day or about the dishes, sending those signals of threat, the more we create literally that safe environment around us, the more that can sometimes help our partners relax into their own self-expression, begin to share stuff with us. Because as much as sometimes we want to just, oh, you don't tell me things, or, I want to hear more from you, or what are you really thinking? I think sometimes we don't unconsciously realize the role we're playing, which is we don't feel safe, and we're not asking at a time where we're calm and grounded, and or when we hear what they're really thinking, we have something to say or we react to it. So chances are, especially if that person has wounding from their own childhood, if they've been invalidated, if they've been, all of the things minimized, or, kind of the conversations have been avoided entirely, then they're not going to feel safe. So when we create that safety and security in our body, it literally kind of expands outward. And it might be then shifting the way we communicate or receive information could create incredible change. Though, of course, then there's also the scenario that it also might not, right? We might come to a place where we do want or need a different level of reciprocity or of support from our partners. So, of course, having two individuals becoming consciously aware, becoming open to these communications, beginning to shift their dynamic, I think is most helpful. But it's not to say that one-sided change can't happen, especially if sometimes much of the cycling is within us as well, right? If we shift what we're imagining to be the case to actually receive what is the case, then the conflict itself might go away.
What up, homie? I got something free and new to share with you right now.
How often are you visited by that negative voice in your head telling you that you're not smart enough, that you're not good enough, experienced enough, not fill in the blank? One of the most powerful things you can learn to do in life is to turn that negative voice into your bestie. And I want to teach you how to do that and so much more in my 4 steps to becoming confident workshop. And guys, the most amazing thing is you can actually register for completely free for this workshop. So click the link on your screen and I'll see you on the inside. And then also I can imagine in that dynamic to be careful not to shame the other person, because when you're doing a lot of the internal work, right, you really do like, oh my God, you need to read this book, you need to do all this work. And if somebody's slightly resistant, I can imagine that dynamic starts to shift where that person, especially if they've had that from childhood, now you're triggering them extra by making them feel badly that maybe they're not doing the work.
Absolutely. And anytime, and sometimes from a very well-intentioned way, very well-meaning, right? We're having all this insight. It's creating such an impact in our life. Even outside of romantic relationships, I see this a lot of times in families, right? We want our mom or dad, we want to gift this book around and get people to see and do these things differently. And I think sometimes hand in hand with that, we can be a little bit minimizing, shaming. We can, say mean things when they don't receive what it is, our gift of knowledge or our gift of change. And that's the reality. Again, we can't control other people. We can't hurry them along on their process. We can't expand their blinders and just get them to see, even if we calmly and rationally communicate our perspective to them with our tools to them. It really is, as the book begins, an internal job. It really takes someone's willingness to let in your perspectives, your information, to actually then receive it and be able to utilize it. So yeah, sometimes I do think we can become even, mean-spirited jokes. Oh, I'm just joking, right? When we're kind of teasing someone who's not in the same place that we are on our journey. I think a lot of times we can use humor to deliver backhanded messages that can be really hurtful, especially, to speak to your point, if that person has been shamed in their childhood or for whatever reason.
Now, if you do the work though, if you're in a relationship, I can see that a romantic relationship, and they're not willing to, obviously, hopefully you find yourself in a position where if it's not right for you, you can leave. But when it does become a family dynamic, it's a lot more complicated. There's so many more deep-rooted, seated issues. But you said earlier that you decided that you had to distance yourself from your family for, I believe you said, 1.5 years. How did you go about doing that? And that's really brave. Like, I really want to say that. Like, it's very hard, I think, for especially, you coming from an Italian family, me coming from a Greek family. I think I would be shamed more for doing that because everybody else would perceive that as like going against your religion, your culture, like everything. How did you do it? And then now knowing that you've basically been able to reconnect with your family, what did that all look like?
Yeah, very similar. Culturally, one of my major mantras growing up is family is everything. Even so much so that I made the choice when I was looking for somewhere to move from New York City, where I was living for almost a decade. I moved back to Philadelphia thinking I wanted to be near my family. And especially as my mom continued to have health issues and health concerns, that guilt was there, that kind of pressure to be at, whether it was family dinner or my mom's very consistent doctor's appointments or navigating whatever health crisis it was always this expectation that not only that I be there, but that in a lot of ways I became, because I'm the doctor of the family, right, relied on emotionally to support, to make sense, to understand, and to navigate everything that was happening. So I've come to the awareness that I have no boundaries, that I don't know who I am, that I'm overstepping my limits, trying to please my family and be the perfect daughter, be the perfect sister, and that I needed a bit of space. And so what that meant for me in practicality was I need to stop being ever available on the receiving end of phone calls at whatever hour, right, whenever it is that they think they need me. I need to not be immediately available. I can obviously assess the nature of the circumstance and the emergency, and more often than not, it wasn't an emergency. It was just this habitual cycle of you're on the receiving end of my phone call when I call, and if you're not there and available, I get worried. Something could be wrong. Usually it goes down to, did something happen to you health-wise? Are you okay? Are you alive even? So after trying to put boundaries and be less available over phone contact, less available, for all of these endless family obligations, I was continuously met with that high level of alert, high level of concern, where I would actually get, Jesus Christ, Nicole, where are you? Just tell us you're alive. So me trying to enact a boundary, and I'm not asking you to change, mom, dad, sister, whomever, right? I'm saying you keep calling me at all hours when you need to. What I'm going to do different, right, boundary, is I'm not going to be available. But what I was continuously met with, because of the high anxiety and what distance meant for all of us, I was met with a continued escalation of their reactivity, which left me then, as I felt, at least at the time, no option but to ask for, or to take, I should say, I didn't necessarily ask for it, I stayed it, to take some time away. And I had no idea how much time that I would want or need away, nor did I have any idea of how they would even react to my request or statement that I did need to step away from the family. And there was the possibility in the back of my mind that I might not be welcomed back on the other side of it. So when I say it was the most difficult decision of my life, it was the most difficult because it was the first time in my life that I was putting me before these relationships that were so, and still are so incredibly important to me, and that I had learned to always put before myself. So it was a practice, really, not only symbolically, but for my inner child in a lot of ways of, for the first time, defining that I matter, that it doesn't matter who's on the receiving end, as much as I do want to be, supportive and a part of my family. I knew I could not continue to do so in that dynamic without space. So I took space. I actually did it by sending a very long, detailed email because I was very nervous to communicate in person. I did not trust the way I would deal with how they reacted inevitably when they broke down, when they screamed, when they yelled, when they told me I couldn't do that, when my mom cried, as I'm sure was all the case behind the scenes. I didn't trust that I would be able to stand in my boundary and take that space anyway. And I also knew that there was a lot that I wanted to share, and it didn't yet feel comfortable for me to vulnerably share with them. different aspects of my experience growing up. So I wrote it all in an email.
So you explained your why as well.
I explained my complete why. I explained, like, I'm on this journey. Here's what I've come to the awareness of, that there's, no boundaries, and they're affecting me negatively in the following ways. And here are some things that, I haven't brought up since childhood that have really hurt me in terms of this lack of dynamic, or in terms of the way the dynamic is in the family. So I voiced a lot of my experience. And at the end, I just very, calmly was like, so I'm going to ask for you to respect that I'm going to be taking some time away just to kind of be with myself and explore what all of this means. And this means that there will be, no contact. Again, I did block them because I was so concerned that if they don't receive this well, if they do start to send me the same kind of text that I had gotten, right? I was just going on habits and the patterns that, had been there. So I anticipated, more or less, that I would get some version of anger or guilt, depending on who it was from, or statement that I can't do this, and not trusting that I wouldn't respond or react then to their plea. I told them that, I was going to be blocking them so that I would not be able to respond, and that, I kind of just left it open-ended because I did not know at that point. I was really broken down about it. It was the most difficult email to ever push send on. I had all of this fear racing through my body. I had a lot of concern about my mom. As she was aging, I thought, oh my gosh, she's, all I've ever worried about is losing my mom my entire life. Now she actually is up in age with health issues, and here I am now, the little time I could have with her left. What if she dies? What if something happens, right? All of this racing through my body, really compelling me to say, you know what, I don't mean it. I'll be at family dinner on Sunday.
Yeah.
What are we eating?
How did you go then from that to then like actually pressing send? Because so everyone listening right now, I guarantee you, is absolutely relating to this story in some way or another. Now, when you're relating to it, the thing is that stops everyone for actually sending that email is the guilt, is everything you just said of what if my mum dies? Oh my God, how am I going to feel if my mum died and I sent her the letter and I never got a chance to see her again? Yeah. And that guilt is exactly what holds people from sending that email.
Yeah, in that moment, I held space for all of that. And I also held space for the possibility that if all of the things I imagine, all the worst case scenarios, if they were true, I held space for the possibility that I would still be okay, right? That I would find a way. I might be devastated. I might have all, more guilt to lay upon the already erupting guilt that I was feeling. But I was already starting to kind of build that foundation of trust and of this kind of solace in that, knowing that that was the decision that I wanted and needed, and that I could, over time, navigate whatever the byproduct of this decision was. So I wasn't fully there in terms of trust, but I was getting to that place where I was, in a sense of like, okay, and that all could happen. And you will find a way to be okay if that does happen, because that was the only thing that I could kind of, that was the belief that I wanted to feed at that moment. So I did. I took a lot of time away. I continued on my journey of continuing to create more self-trust, more boundaries in all my relationships. That really bled out. When you could do it with your family, it really became much easier to start to say no at work and start to say no and be more honest with even friendships in terms of, what I was interested in, what would work, what wouldn't work. So that really kind of set a ball in motion. And then it was very difficult though, the first round of holidays, of birthdays, like, oh, I'm not there. They're not wishing me happy birthday. Oh. Like, how are they, navigating me not being present, and all the different places my mind went. And then I started to shift, and the way I was thinking about them wasn't necessarily in guilt, was in openness, was in curiosity. I started to feel much more centered in myself and my ability to navigate not only the big disappointment that I imagined I was when I took the space, but anything that they could kind of be feeling as a result and that I knew I would be met with. So when that consistently started to happen, that I was like, oh, I wonder, I do want to know how they are. I'm open to knowing that I would have to continue to show up differently now, stand in these continued boundaries that I had already created, not take responsibility for whatever circumstances had happened since I had been gone or would continue to happen into the future. And having had practice for that 18 months, I was starting to feel confident that I could do that and that I could handle, even if it was rejection that I received. So similarly, I sent an email because I didn't want to assume that they even wanted contact with me. So it was a much shorter email where I kind of just shared with them what my year and a half had been like, and that I was, really open to just a conversation to see kind of where they were, how they are, and what they too wanted for the future. And they near immediately responded back to me, actually sharing that not only were they kind of...
Was this everybody responded back or individually?
I had sent the email as a joint to my dad, my sister, and my mom, because they were kind of my core family. I have a brother, but he's much more on the periphery. And then it was a kind of family signed.
Collective.
A collective. I'm quite sure my sister typed it up. I'm quite sure with the help of the therapist that they were seeing. So it came back to me, but it was kind of from the gang kind of feel. Though they then disclosed to me that they had been in individual and in family therapy.
Because or since you were there?
That my leaving kind of woke them up to the need to do things a bit differently. So they sought all of that out on their own. And they actually had asked and requested, which I wholeheartedly agreed with, that the first time we speak would be in a family therapy session. And I thought that was a great idea, again, because of the contained boundaries. They already had an established relationship. I went to their family therapist. I attended. And so I signed. I was sitting in my Venice apartment, and I went into the back bedroom, and I signed on to a Zoom link. And that was the first time I had seen them in a year and a half. And then that just opened up a conversation where, of course, I allowed them to share all of the different levels of impact, how it was to receive that email, how it's been since, where they're at now. There was anger, there was sadness, there was gratitude even a bit. And since then, it's just been, we had several sessions actually within family therapy before we migrated the relationship and kind of shared phone numbers again. I think I'd gotten a new phone number by then. So I had to give them my new phone number, and before we kind of decided to begin to navigate our relationship outside of that safe container of therapy. And since then, honestly, it's just been, my sister continues to express gratitude for the awareness that allowed her to have, as devastating. I know they were all very greatly impacted, though my sister had come to really rely on me and our relationship, and we had a lot of codependency within the whole family, but with her and I in particular. And she's been just really grateful and has grown in so many ways. And the relationship now structurally between myself and her and myself and my dad just is different. There's boundaries now. There's a mutual respect. There's not an immediacy of expectation that someone be ever available. There's not a personalization when someone's not available. There's an understanding that there's other things going on in my world, in their world. So it's been a gift. As difficult as it was, the growth that has happened on the other side of it. So I do hope that listeners, because family dynamics are really hard to change. And sometimes you have to make decisions that were never anything I would have ever imagined making. And never in a million years would have imagined, kind of cutting off my family, as so many of us, kind of call it and feel it, and putting them through that. Though the other side of it has just been such a transformation.
Did you process what would you have felt or done if they hadn't emailed you back? I could imagine the concern of being re-triggered or going back to the childhood trauma.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there was a lot of moments where that was, of course, the hope was that wasn't going to be the case. Though while I can't fully remember all of the different silent treatments, I do remember one. I was, 19, and it was actually a little over a month and a half long when my mom had come to find out that I was gay, and her way of expressing her disapproval, allegedly from my girlfriend at the time, not because I was gay, though she did get on board with my next relationship quite quickly, so perhaps that was true. I do somewhat have a recollection of the pain of that. I know that there were many more silent treatments. My sister has somewhat of a recollection of many more silent treatments in childhood, though I can't necessarily place the feeling, though my body can. So in those moments, even when I wasn't in contact with them, that space in and of itself absolutely activated that existential crisis of, the abyss of, oh my gosh, no family. What if they never come back? Again, what if something happens and they die? So they're not even available to come back on the other end. So that was all very much alive.
And thank you for sharing the story, by the way. It's so freaking powerful, and it's so admirable and brave of you to have done it and then stick to your guns, because, again, I think that it sounds amazing, but everyone's like, okay, I'm going to do it. And then that real fear of being rejected or not feeling wanted, especially if that's potentially a core wound of yours, to have to then, you almost like, you in your actions, you are reliving it. And it's due to the thing that you've done, that you're showing up. And so many people don't send that email. And so my curiosity is, how did that impact then your relationships with your partner?
Yeah, so like kind of practice in a relationship, especially a core one, of putting up a boundary, of even sending that message that, wait a minute, I'm here too, absolutely trickled over. I started to be able to more easefully stand in my own space, explore the moments where I wanted or needed something different than what my partner wanted or needed, or that was available to me in that moment. It had given me a little bit of, kind of that self-sufficiency, like, okay, like I can do this. Like I did something incredibly hard, right? I was so subconsciously reliant on this idea of my family and this emotional support that I imagined they gave me, that when I really came down to it, I realized that they weren't really emotionally available. I was connected to them in a superficial way. And once I kind of not only logically worked through that, but showed myself that, like, okay, emotionally, I spent a lot of time crying and being devastated, and I was still okay. So I was kind of gaining my own tools of soothing my own big emotions and rebuilding that deeper sense of emotional trust. And then that bled over into how I navigate it, not being so reliant always on my partner to take away, right, when I'm feeling bad, to be available to me when I need support, and to like create the space to honor when there are moments like I was sharing of differing wants, of differing needs, to be able to have boundaries, to tolerate space within my relationships. Lolly naturally, since when we met, like I was sharing, I was very independent, was raised with a lot of independence within her family. So naturally from the beginning, very much challenged me when she needed time or space just away from stimulation and away from socializing, or wanted to pursue her interest or whatever was, kind of something that was on her mind at the time. And initially that was very challenging because that all indicated space, bad. You shouldn't want distance from me, and there's something wrong with our relationship. And when I actually took space from my core relationships, it created the opportunity to be able to teach myself that I actually could tolerate not only giving Lolly space, but open myself to the possibility that, wait a minute, I might need space too. It's natural for a human to need time away, even from our core partners, to just be in our own energy, to be able to actually embrace solitude. Not stillness is something scary like it once was, but that kind of replenishing nature. Now, I'm on this trip by myself and my partner's at home, and I'm like, I'm enjoying this so much because I get to just be with me and connect with my friends. And that's, what I actually need. So, the byproducts of that really huge life-changing choice within my family are continuing to just kind of play out in all of this new, more secure way. Being far apart from someone, having a different need or interest at any given moment doesn't lessen the connection. For a lot of us, it actually builds the connection and the security in it.
I love that. And Tom and I call it selfish time. So it's like, babe, what do you want to do for your selfish time? Because every weekend, I know you're going to want a time to do either something that I don't want to do or do something by yourself.
Right.
And so having that discussion about what do you want to do, and then we take that time where he goes and does his thing, and that's when I draw, that's like the kind of going inwards for me. But we have this almost like the dialogue between us, so then neither of us ever feel neglected or, dismissed or abandoned or anything like that.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. I'm always so inspired when I watch the two of you as you share, you navigating those moments. Because again, I think a lot of us have this expectation that we share the same interests with our partners, or the same desire for how our free time is spent, or even our energy cycles are the same, and you should want to go do something when really maybe I just want to sit on the couch, and we're not energetically aligned. Or again, emotionally, there could be things coming up for one partner and a desire to do something different than what is available or what the other partner wants. So I think when we again realize that we're two separate people with two separate perspectives, two separate wants and desires, it can many times strengthen that security of connection, because you can come and rejoin and come back together to your home base, even if you are pursuing different hobbies or interests or tending to your needs in a different way in any given moment.
Yeah. I want to go back to something actually you just said, where you said that there are moments, so after you had as you were kind of rebuilding yourself, I guess is the word that I will use, and you said there were many times where you were just crying and in tears, and like I'm just picturing like this devastation of having to make that change. And then you said, but I knew that I was going to be okay. How did you know? Because in those moments, it doesn't actually feel like you're going to be okay. Sometimes it does feel like all the walls and the ceilings all coming down at you.
Yeah, and the reason why it can feel so all-consuming is because, again, we've activated the living memory of a time where it wasn't okay, where it was overwhelming, where there wasn't another side. You didn't have the tools, right? We needed that human to be the one to make us feel okay, and now they're not physically present or they're not emotionally present. So I just like to give language to those inconsolable, all-consuming moments, because they're real. They're nothing to shame us out of. We're literally going back to a time and a place where things weren't okay, and we didn't know. There was the possibility that they might not be okay. If someone doesn't come back to physically care for us in childhood, I mean, we don't continue to live on, right? Emotionally, if someone doesn't come back to help us, to tend to us and to help us regulate, we do become consumed by whatever it is that we're feeling, the stress or the upset. So I want to normalize why those things happen. And I was able to, and we're able to kind of build a foundation of okayness, even if it's just an idea that we're affirming, when we again begin to build a practice of returning our body ourself, or of seeking support. So by that point, I was already reconnecting with my body. I was becoming very aware of my nervous system. I was learning new ways to regulate through the physiological reaction that was happening. And I was opening my blinders as I was sharing to the actual supportive partner that I had available to me. I mean, Lolly was with me through that whole experience of coming to the decision that I needed to step away, sending the email, and then in the aftermath of it. So her and I were, kind of building a safety and a support within the relationship itself. So not only was I becoming a little more confident in my ability and reminding myself that I wasn't in that overwhelm, I didn't have to be at least overwhelmed anymore. I had tools that I could begin to use, including the support of a partner, or of course for listeners, this could be a friend, this could be a supportive professional, right? Actually relying on the support in those moments when we don't feel okay, which means that we have to sometimes share our deepest, darkest, shameful thing that we are feeling all consumed and we don't believe we're going to be okay, so that we can actually let the support in that we might need.
How did you build that skill set then? And then instead of just relying then on your partner to be there as a substitute for what's missing?
Right. I continue to remind myself that she could not be the only person, right? That makes me okay. Because I do think that can be a natural thing that happens. Oh, well, you're not here, I'll just find someone else that is, or, and I'll just now overly rely on you. I'd been aware of my habit to do that so that I could kind of, be that hovering presence to notice, especially in those moments where I was inconsolable and all I wanted her to do was take away the feeling, right? Actually actively reminding myself that that feeling wasn't anything she created. I was feeling that deep, grief, that overwhelm, whatever it was, because I was feeling that, because I once felt that, and that I was feeling that because I didn't feel like I had the ability to feel any other way. So when we project this idea that people can take away our emotions, I do think, again, we set up an unattainable cycle for both people, because she could have showed up in the most perfect way possible, and she's not going to remove that deep hole that I have, that my family and my relationship to these core people are gone. No one can take that away from me. And then I leave her feeling ill-equipped, unable to be supportive, and depending on how I'm reacting, when she's not making me feel better, right, we can actually become really conflicted, and I can shut myself off. So it's, again, just this constant dance of becoming aware of ourselves enough that we can drop in and shift out of that very hyper-focused idea of, okay, this is too much, I can't take this, to wait a minute, this is a lot, and I can do something, though I can't rely totally on this one person. So it's kind of being our own conscious presence to coach ourselves through it, and to remind ourselves to use some of the tools and to support ourselves too, just as much as we're relying on someone else.
And becoming the love that we seek.
And becoming the love that we seek. And I think that really comes back to, right, to give and to receive, and teaching ourselves, not only in theory, but how to actually give and receive. Because again, there's still a very vulnerable part of me, like played out between you and I, that in those moments where I am unconsolable, I don't actually want my partner to see, right? I want to make it about her and something she's not doing in the moment, when in reality, it's not about her. It's about my deep grief that I'm feeling about just what is. And there's nothing that she can do in any direction. So I think it's always, that kind of reminder that to receive the support, we have to ask for the support, and then we have to receive the support or the love.
Dude, that's so strong. Because in your book where you were saying, we instinctually say it's them, right? They're like this. That's why that relationship didn't work. They didn't bring this to the table. But to be able to go inwards and really ask yourself, what are you bringing to the table? How are you showing up? I think is so powerful, like that ownership. And then if you're then become the love that you seek, now you're the person with you, your partner, it becomes additive, not instead of.
Yeah. It's a really beautiful way to think about it, right? They can enhance, they can complement, they can bring a different perspective at times. I think this is another kind of aspect of what I would define as authentic love, which is sometimes being the person to offer that distance perspective, taking that blinder away, even if it's something difficult, having the hard conversation. Kind of what inspired a lot of my reality and my realization, I should say, within my family was Lolly. Was her being present to me in the days leading up to a family visit and experiencing this increased agitation and this nitpicking that I would do and these fights that would happen between us. And then we'd be at my family's house and she'd be alongside of me trying to just enjoy time, and I'd be, sparking orders at her or being mean to her outright. And then the emotional fallout would last for days after. And as much as I wanted to deny it, when she had to sit me down in a very calm way and say, Nicole, I'm noticing this cycle. You seem very stressed out and agitated for essentially a week around your family's visit. And quite honestly, you treat me in a very mean way as a result of it, right? And I wanted to deny and say, how dare you say this to me? That's not what's happening. That's not true at all. And how, you're being inconsiderate of my need for having my family relationship. And in reality, she was being none of that. She was actually giving me a gift of a different perspective. She was allowing me to try on, and I didn't just take it for her word for it. I then explored myself. Coming up to the next visit, I noticed, oh my God, Nicole, you are feeling agitated. Sunday is looming, right? Like this big, terrible thing, because in reality, you don't want to go. And look at all the ways you're taking out, you're not wanting to go. You are nitpicking more. And then when you are there, you're so on edge, trying to zoom around and just keep the family happy and put on the performance and be connected in whatever way is possible, that you actually are being snippy and mean and snarky to Lolly. So I saw it for myself. So sometimes when we're talking about being the love, it's offering someone that very gentle nudge of awareness, because we can't see for ourselves.
And being open to hearing that from the people around you that you very much trust, and not just shutting them down because it's uncomfortable.
Yeah. Though that tendency was there from the beginning, and it can be. It can take a bit of time to relax into, okay, I can hear this difficult thing. My mind might say, no, you're wrong, but let me see. And you might be wrong, but you might be right. And when you're right, and when you can see a different perspective or a different experience of yourself, I think that's what can open the door for a lot of incredible change in the relationship.
And if you try to open your heart, what I do with Tom is, because I trust him so much, when he says something, I'm like, okay, this is uncomfortable, but what if he's right? Like, how can this actually help you, Lisa, instead of being a problem that now you have to overcome?
Right, because I think so easily we hear a different perspective as a personal attack. Right, as someone's trying to minimize us or invalidate us or be mean by saying it. I think the more we have experience with someone, the more, even if that's our instinctual reaction, the more we can maybe actively remind ourselves that this person has, if not our best interest, the relationship best interest at mind. And they're not just trying to tear us down or say something mean, that they might be speaking from, their experience, even if we don't agree with it or we can't say it immediately. It could have benefit for the relationship ultimately.
Yeah. Oh, my homie, where can people find you, all the amazing things you're doing, and your new book?
Absolutely. So the book is available wherever books are sold. I have a new website, howtobetheloveyouseek.com. So you can take a look. There's a whole list of retailers, though, wherever you buy a book, hopefully it'll be stocked there. At this point, we're across all of the social media platforms. It all began on the Instagram, the holistic.psychologist. But at this point, whether it's TikTok or Threads or Twitter, X, whatever we're calling it these days, there's a version of the Holistic Psychologist handle you can drop into the search bar. Reviving our YouTube channel, so come find us on YouTube. I'll be putting out some new videos starting in the next couple weeks.
Ladies, don't freaking settle. Keep watching to learn the surprising reasons you should actually stay single.
We think that speaking to our needs is unromantic, or that our person should intuitively know exactly what we need. And if I have to speak to it, that means I'm being too needy. And I've just kind of reevaluated and reframed how I think about romance, and that I think speaking to what you need is the most romantic thing ever. And I think that the right person wants to give you that need. And I think your soulmate, your perfect partner, whatever word you want to put on it, they're going to get pretty close because they are that person for you. But no one can fully know what you need and how to love you and what you like to hear until you state it. But I think in that context, we're very quick to have these conversations of maybe I am too needy, because we think that we shouldn't have to voice these things. And I think it's great. I mean, I'm sure from your relationship, you'd agree that it's great and it's healthy and you should speak to those things, because you could have an amazing partner who wants to give you everything and love you fully, and they want to do all these things, but they can't read your mind. They can get 90% of the way there. So I just come back to this idea of we talk ourselves out because we're like, well, that's not romantic. He should know, she should know. And then we start to devolve and have these conversations, which I just think is unfair to the reality of a relationship. I'm sure you'd agree. But that's how I think about it.
1,000%. Yeah. And one of the stories that came to mind is me and my husband on our honeymoon. So we go to Rome. We went to Venice and Rome, and we're in Rome. We're there for 4 days. And so the first night, I'm like, babe, where do you want to eat? Now, at the time, my husband wasn't very experimental with his food. So being a white boy from Tacoma, Washington, he was like, he wants chicken nuggets and fries.
Oh, man.
So we're in Rome, and he says he wants to go to the Hard Rock Cafe. I was like, well, bless him. It's his honeymoon too. We'll go to the Hard Rock Cafe. Day 2 comes. I turn around because I feel like I'm a good wife. I'm going to take care of his needs. Babe, where do you want to go? Hard Rock Cafe. So we go to the Hard Rock Cafe again. 3rd night. Babe, where do you want to go? Hard Rock Cafe. We have 1 more night left. And the last night, I was like, I just scream almost in his face, please, no more Hard Rock Cafe. I can't do another. I just want some pasta. Yeah. And he turns to me and he's like, why didn't you just say so? Yeah. And I was like, well, what do you mean? Yeah. And he's like, you just kept asking me what I wanted, and I told you. So it was interesting that he had no problem saying what he needs or wants, but yet here I was, just asking him, but not actually addressing what I needed. And so by the final day, it became almost like an explosion for me. Yeah. But he just was so calm and was like, you just didn't say it. And I was like, wow. And thankfully it happened at the beginning of our marriage. So I was like, well, that was a very clear-lined lesson to just say what you need and then have the discussion about how you both necessarily get what you want and maybe you compromise or something. But it was just so enlightening. That's
a great story. I would be at the Hard Rock Cafe too. I'm a dino nugs, mac and cheese, mashed potatoes kind of guy for sure. So I respect that. A creature of habit. I love that. But yeah, I mean, again, we don't like to say women are like this and men are like this, but I do think there's some conditioning there that speaks to that, where men are like, yeah, well, because I want that, or I need that, or I deserve that. That's why I spoke to that. Whereas I think there's pressure on women in general in society not to fall into this trope of like the whiny, needy girlfriend or wife or whatever it may be. And while maybe there is room for where that is accurate, I think for the most part, it is an illusion brought about by this assumption that speaking to your needs makes you needy, too picky, or whiny. Whereas, to a man, it's like, yeah, you speak to what you want, you speak to what you deserve. You just do it because you can't read, your mind can't be read. So I think it is kind of a thing to sit there and be like, oh, this person will telepathically know what I want, and eventually we'll get to that state. Whereas the right person wants you to speak to those things, and to them, it's like the sexiest thing in the world. You're giving me the blueprint for how to make you feel good and love you, whether that we could even in intimacy and in emotional needs, everything. It's like the right person is going to want to hear those things. And the right person isn't going to be like, oh, don't do that. So, but unfortunately, I'm sure there are instances where someone did speak to their needs and the person threw them back at them, or these things. That's why, again, why we don't want to be hurt twice. But I think the place of truth that I operate from is that speaking to what you want and deserve is sexy, is wanted by your partner.
And I think, I'm glad that you said that last thing, because it's I want to feel needed. It makes me feel good.
Even better point, yeah.
So have you watched the movie Daryl? I think it's called Daryl. It's like really old. So the concept is that these husband and wife, and they end up having they got like a robotic child, and it's like a robot. And so the robot can do everything. It doesn't need its mom. And so by the end, the mom's just so sad. And the robot's like turning to the dad and is like, I don't understand mom. And he's like, because you don't need her. And so by the end, this robot kid starts pretending it needs help choosing its clothes, it needs help choosing the food. And that was what the woman needed. It's a great example of humanity, is that it feels good to feel needed. And so if you're in a healthy relationship, that actually could be a great sign, right? Whereas if you say a need and your partner actually shows up with excitement.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, I think, again, you talk about men and masculinity. Men want to feel like providers and powerful and action-oriented. So the right guy is, of course, going to want to give you these things. He wants to feel like, he's needed in a sense, but also that he can do these things. He can rise above. He can do it. That reminds me of a topic that I just talked about, which I'm very hot on lately, is like thinking about this idea of being in love, or like, what is love, right? The ultimate subject. And I'm sure there's no wrong answer for it, just as there's no complete right answer. But I think a lot of times we confuse love for solely being a feeling, in that we're in love. I am in love. It's an adjective. I think it's an adjective, some kind of adjective statement. I am in love. I am in the feeling, the emotion of love. Whereas, I think that's true. But what caused that is choices. Like, love is choices. Love is the choices that one makes, and they're likely choices that are amidst discomfort or aversion to doing them. That is the real, barometer for love. It's the choices that are being made. So I think a lot of times, if you're trying to gauge like the health of a relationship or your partner's enthusiasm for a relationship, like, you have to look solely at the choices that are being made, not just the feelings, because I'm sure there are instances in a very healthy relationship where on a Tuesday, you're not feeling completely in love. It's just one of those days you got a lot on your mind. But if we're always looking at, am I in love? Do I feel in love as the barometer? I think we can start really rattling our cage with, well, maybe this relationship isn't right. Maybe I'm not in love. But if we're looking at the choices, you make the tough choices for them. They make the tough choices for you. They do the things because they know you want them, even if they don't want to do them. That, I think, is a great lens to look through. And I think it's a powerful way to look at love, because it's all behavior, of course, and the feeling is the byproduct, the symptom of that. So I come back to that as like looking at the choices that you're making for your partner. I think a lot of men, are quick to talk themselves out of a relationship. It's very easy to be like, oh, well, this threatens my independence, or whatever. Maybe I think in my 20s that was a big reason that I would like talk myself out of commitment. I'd be like, oh, I've got a million things I want to do. I can't be in a relationship and be independent at the same time. And those were very at odds with me. So I think coming back to like, what are the choices that you make, even if they're hard? I think that's a great way to gauge your like real truthful inclination towards a relationship. Even if they're the tough ones to make. Choices, not just feelings, choices, not just emotions, I think is a really healthy way to look.
How did you make that choice then in your 20s?
Again, about the reframing, I kind of redefined what I think the purpose of a relationship is. Talking about words and phrases, I don't like the phrase settle down. And I used to think about that phrase. Everyone used to say, I'm ready to settle down. I had my fun. I'm ready to settle down. I'm successful enough. I'm ready to settle down. And I think that gave me and gives us such a backwards understanding of what the right relationship gives us. I think the right relationship gives us the opposite of settling down with that person. It gives you more life. It gives you more of everything, because now you have this person together, which you can go out and you have this incredible safety net, and you can go out and do more and see more and, just challenge yourself more. So I think for that one, that was a reshift. And then two, specifically independence. I think the right partner makes you more independent. And I always used to wrestle with that because I always used to think, well, partnership means you lose your independence. It's just inevitable. And maybe that's the trope that we see in movies and whatnot, or maybe there's bad examples that we look to. But there's even something called the dependency paradox, which is a psychological observation in child rearing and adolescence, where the more dependency you have between a child and a caretaker, dependency being good dependency, like loyalty, honesty, openness, like the whole thing, the tighter that bond is, the more independent the child is, because they know that they have a parent who, if they trip and fall, they'll pick them up. If they're willing to take a step out on their own and try and fail and be rejected and so on and so forth, because they know they have that safety net. And I don't know when I read about that, and obviously there's degrees to which that's healthy or not healthy, but I always thought about that within the context of a relationship. The closer you are with a partner means you're encouraged to be more independent. And again, thinking about, like, we used to think that speaking your needs is unromantic. I used to think that if I looked at a relationship and one person was independent in the relationship, I was like, that's not a healthy relationship. Like, something's wrong there. And I just totally reframed it. It's like, no, that outside looking in, that's good. That means they have that compassionate dependency, not codependency, but like emotional, bonding there, that they're willing to encourage each other to be independent. And that really just kind of helped me rethink the purpose of a relationship, not to settle down, not to rob you of your independence. It's literally the opposite. Again, talking about opposites and spectrum, that was really freeing for me.
Oh my God, I love this so much. As you were talking, I was thinking about the word independent. I was like, wow, how have we got ourselves so trapped in this word independent that if you're with someone, it means you can't be? And so the word independent almost now means like walls, barriers, blockages.
Yeah.
And there's a quote, God, I wish I could remember who said it, but it's something like, the most successful people are the people with the most stable home life.
Yeah.
And when I think about that is so true. It's a person that you don't feel like you're on rocky ground at home. So you can go out, you can be independent and try new things and try things in business or try things at work. But know that no matter what happens, you've got that stable life at home where your partner's going to be there for you.
Yeah.
And the independence thing is, I think, the fear of, I can't do what I used to. So my husband, I know who I married. He was ambitious. He is ambitious. So to me, getting married was more just me then helping him on his ambition. Not now saying, well, you were ambitious when you were by yourself, but now that we're in a relationship, this thing that makes you who you are, I now don't want that. And I think a lot of people fear that the thing that makes them them, when they get into a relationship, someone's going to try and rob them of it.
Yeah. And I think it's a normal fear, but I think it's a very misplaced fear. I think a lot about, again, the purpose of a relationship. It's not to settle down. It's not to rob you of your independence. I think about it when in the sense, the cliche of, you should try to find someone who is whole, who is, your two wholes coming together, not two perfect people, but just two wholes in the sense of that. And the idea is your partner is there to amplify what you've already created, or amplify the path that you're on in a realistic sense, right? Of course, in a respectful, reciprocity driven way, but it's like their role and your role is to amplify the happiness, the drive, the fulfillment, the curiosity that is true to you. And I like that word, amplify. They're not there to complete you. They're not there to offer you new complete purpose and here's your life now. They're there to amplify. And that's why I'm big, again, I encourage people as best they can to be patient and to focus on themselves and build something that only they can give to themselves in the pursuit of being whole, and then have that person come along and amplify it, and you amplify that. To me, that's a beautiful way to think about a relationship. Maybe a bit idealistic, but I think the idea of amplifying, not robbing, certainly not putting, not detracting, absolutely. But I think independence is the most practical way to bring it to life. And in my current relationship with my girlfriend, it's the perfect representation of that. I am very driven. I do a lot of, creative things where I'm always just chasing little things, and it's great and it's fine. And she does her own thing as well. And there is never a moment of I wonder if that's a bad thing that, she doesn't want to do this with me, or I'm here right now and she didn't come with me to this. It's no, it's we have each other's back so firmly that we're empowered to do it.
Is there a fine line between about being these two independent people that have these drives, that have these goals and desires and dreams, and then coming together if they don't align?
Absolutely, I'm sure. I mean, I think probably come back to the idea of like love languages and like, what do you need? Like, what makes you feel loved? Like, I think if you're too independent, we lose sight of, the needs within the relationship. If it's quality time or physical touch or whatever the stereotypical things are, I think that becomes a problem. Or again, if you go to a deeper level and you're trying to prove something through your independence outside of the relationship, or like that you're worthy of being loved or things like that. Again, the full cycle there, I think that's probably where we get in trouble. But I think, as with everything, the answer is balance. I think at a certain point in a relationship, even if you are hyper independent and you always go and you want to do things, at a certain point you need to come back to the relationship and make maybe the tough choice for the night to close the laptop and just be together. I think, again, tough. I mean, not even tough, but just compassionate choices. But I'm sure it's a slippery slope, I'm sure, of people who are too defined by their work or their curiosity, where we need to come back and practice patience and some stillness. That's big for me. I think in relationships or outside of relationships, just rushing, always trying to do these things where we look back and we realize we had all these amazing moments together and we didn't appreciate them while we had them. My girlfriend and I are really big right now on being in a moment and saying, this is a core memory. You think about the core memory phase, maybe as a TikTok thing or just in general, but it's like, the only way we define core memories is looking back. You're like, man, that was a core memory. Oh, take me back, take me back to our honeymoon. Like, oh, beautiful. That was so great. It's like, that's great. It's great to reminisce. It's great to be nostalgic. But I want to say in the moment that this is a core memory, or this is a core memory together. And we're going to appreciate it as such in the moment. So like, that's big for me. That's just presence and that's just gratitude. But I think that's very, very important. And maybe that's the kind of the pause moment between two hyper independent people that, can help bring you together and actually be present. Because isn't that the point of a relationship, to be present together?
In those moments, like, the core memories can be beautiful, but also they can be really detrimental, right? Like, you have this beautiful relationship and then you have this one moment that can actually crack your relationship forever, that then becomes a core memory that you wish you didn't have.
Yep. Balance. Yeah. That's the toughest part. It's like, what do we do with that memory? I mean, I think the cliche is like, do we use it to empower ourselves or do we use it to hold ourselves back? I mean, I think that's the magic of life. If you can figure that out, where you have bad, frustrating memories and you can take what you need from it, namely a learning, some kind of patience with yourself. If you can do that, I think you've got 99% of life figured out. And that's the toughest thing in the world, is like, what do you do with that memory? What is that proof of? Again, it's like in the court of law. Are you the prosecutor or are you the defendant? Like, what is our ethos on life? Or like, I'd say, like, are we glass half full or half empty? And life isn't that simple, but like, what are the facts that we've established for ourselves that we're looking to support? Not delusionally, because sometimes you deserve to be embarrassed or rejected, or like, life is life, but like, what can we do with that so we don't devolve and go to this headspace of determining future worth based on past experience? That is the key to life. And if we had a blueprint for that, everyone would follow it, but I think it's unique to each and every person.
I love that. You just mentioned patience though, but in your book, you talk about one of the big things that people say, like one of the bad dating advice or relationship advices is, like, oh no, like, have hope that they're going to change. And like, you're just like, sometimes, like, hope can actually just lead you astray and you end up staying in a relationship because you have the hope. So where's the gap or the line between patience and hope?
I think it's a fine one. I think it's a fine line. I don't know. I mean, I think for me, the question, like, I think there's a big temptation in, like, it's weird. We're very hypocritical. It's like, we're always rushing. Of course, I'm getting older. I got to get in a relationship. I got to be SVP of this guy. I got to do these things. But then when we find ourselves in situations that aren't, reciprocated or not a healthy relationship, all of a sudden we become very patient. Oh, things will change, or, I've got that vision for the white picket fence. Like, one day things will be good. So like, we're very hit or miss with our emotions. It is kind of funny that we do that. So I think a big problem, of course, is we date in potential and we don't date in reality. We're very quick to give people credit for the things that we see a glimmer of hope for, and then we ignore the things that are like glaring red flags. And again, I think that's a personal balance. We need to figure out what it is that we want and deserve and hold ourselves to it. That's a personal journey. I think for me, the question I always come back to in those contexts is, in this moment, with the way the relationship currently is, not date one, date two, but like, we're in the relationship. If nothing were to change from here, is this good enough for me? I don't really like the phrase good enough, but just practically, is this fulfilling enough? Is this compassion enough? Is this whatever enough, this thing that we're after? That's the most, revealing question. And certainly every relationship and every person is evolving and needing work, and we're all finding ways to love ourselves more and love other people and work through insecurities. But looking at like the measure of reciprocity in the relationship, what is given and what is received, what is the enthusiasm either way, if nothing about that were to change, is that good enough for you in the moment? I think a lot of times we don't answer that question, or we're afraid to ask it because sometimes the answer is no, and then we're back to the conversation about starting over, and that's tough. But I think finding a way, again, mindfulness, finding a way to zoom back in on the present, and instead of placing all of our hopes in potential and what could be, thinking about change. I mean, the cliche is true that, people have to want to change. You can't force someone to change. I certainly think you can be a catalyst for someone to change. You could be the reason that they change, in the sense that you have provided them proof of why they should change and they want to change, not to appease you, not to get you off their back, not so you stop whining about it, whatever things they might say, but like from a place of truth and power from them. They want to change because your example in their life has shown them why it's real, why they should, why they've been remiss this whole time. In that instance, I think change is possible, and I think you can play a role, but I'd say 90% of the time, the whole trope of like, he will change for me, or she will change, or whatever variation, I think it's misplaced. You can't force someone to change. And I think, unfortunately, we realize that sometimes late in that process where we're doing this negotiation with each other. The only proof is changed behavior, but it has to come from a place of genuine intention and why. They have to know why they're doing these things so that it's long-standing change. Otherwise, it'll just collapse on itself.
So you can't change someone. But let's say you're in this relationship and you've done all the work, you've really tried to choose the right person, you show up confident, you stand your ground, you have these boundaries, you set yourself up for success, you communicate with your partner, and over time, you start to change, but they don't. So now in this situation, I want to really tie everything that we've just spoken about together. So now in this situation, you can't change them. You've done your own self-work. You've really dug deep into finding your self-worth. But they don't change. In those moments, at what point do you walk away?
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, I don't know. To be honest, I don't know. I think the answer that I would come back to would be, have you had the conversation about their change? Maybe, for them, they have put, a ceiling on their growth, and they haven't had the curiosity driving them, or for something's holding them back that isn't a reflection of their, health, of their appetite for you, their enthusiasm for you. I think that could always be true. I always try to approach things from a place of empathy. Like, you talk to a lot of women, they're like, the guy, he didn't try to kiss me after a date or something like that, or he didn't text me. And then you dive into it, and a couple relationships ago, he did, and was horribly rejected and made fun of. Or, he did text and she was like, ew, get away from me, I never want to date you. And he internalized that, right? In the same way that women internalize things. So we're carrying with us these things that have dictated limits to our enthusiasm, to our action, maybe to our growth, things like that. So, I'm not encouraging people to be overly patient and put up with things that are clearly beneath their standard for growth and evolution. But I think, the only way to truly know is to have these conversations to see what is their awareness of yours versus theirs. Maybe this is not even on the plate. But from there, I think it's up to you. Again, I'm deciding if nothing were to change at this point, is that good enough? Because we're always evolving. And I would challenge people to not always be chasing better and more. I think, I always come back to the idea of we are always, in a sense, chasing better and more in life. And I think that's great. I think we're all capable of better and more in a sense. But I have found in my life that some of my most fulfilling moments and evolutions have come from different and simpler. Not necessarily 10x or bigger or better, but different or simpler
so
varieties.
Chasing simpler or different versus chasing something better.
Correct. Or considering something different or simpler. Maybe the key to, a professional change or a relationship change lies in simpler. Maybe let's take some of the things out that are detracting rather, instead of trying to just build. Maybe that's a thought. So I think just like opening your heart and your mind to like what growth looks like, as opposed to always assuming it's just this like lateral kind of on a straight line thing. Could be a thought. But then at the end of the day, of course, I think it comes down to that question: if nothing were to change, is this good enough? Is this growth oriented? Isn't enough, and so on and so forth.
Oh, that's really strong, because again, I think through the idea that I think everyone wants a long-lasting, happy relationship, right? The happy is very important. And so every time I think through this, I mean, I've told you that I've been married for 20 years. We both evolve and we both change. So even if you do the work, right? Like if you're single and you've done the work of making sure that, you know who you are, you've done like everything that we've just spoken about. Now I just think about, you've done all that, you have this beautiful relationship, but 10, 15, 20 years down the line, you hope to be different people. And so if one of you has either grown and the other one hasn't, or if you've grown in opposite directions, what's that thing? I'm always looking, right? What's that thing that allows people to reconnect? And I've thought through this 1,000 different ways. I don't know where I would be if my husband didn't also have a growth mindset, because I've got such a growth mindset that the advice I always give, and in fact, I get a lot of pushback on this, help me actually, Case. I get a lot of pushback because I'm like, well, do this, say this, do this. And they're like, yeah, but it's worked for you because you have a partner who has a growth mindset, who can receive that type of conversation.
Yeah. I think for me, being younger, 34, in a 2-year relationship, I think for me, like once you're in a relationship, we can't change the past, of course, but I think it's so important to define what a healthy relationship looks like to you. What is the point of a relationship? Again, finding someone with a growth mindset, I think you're going to find that person if you've aligned from the beginning that a relationship is not about settling down, right? So again, going back to what we're talking about there. So maybe that's your pre-flight checklist before you get in a relationship. So once you're in the relationship, I'm not so sure, but I do think a lot of communication is going to be healthy. But also again, it's like I genuinely challenge myself, because I definitely have a growth mindset, and I think sometimes I think growth mindset's essential. I think it's imperative. But I think sometimes it can get the better of you. Of like, you're always chasing something, could be bigger, better, but why? Like, why do you want that thing that you're trying to evolve to? And we're not necessarily talking about emotional intelligence growth and, things like that, like the internal stuff, but like accolades and exposure and things like that. Like, why are we trying to evolve to that? So I really do try to challenge myself in those instances. Why? Why am I going after these things? Bigger questions like, why do I even want the things that I want? Maybe these aren't true to me, and I have tricked myself into thinking this is a growth mindset where it's really not. I'm just copying and pasting, and now that's a different conversation, and that's coming back to me. So that's how I would approach it, knowing I don't really have the breadth of a longer relationship to have a great answer to that, but like challenging yourself on, why do you want these things? Are you trying to prove something? Talk a lot in the book about mimetic desire, about why you want the things you want. Maybe they aren't true to you. Maybe you've spent a lifetime chasing something only to realize it never really meant anything to you. You just did it because you've been conditioned in a sense to want it. So society has taught you that this is what you want. And maybe you've duped yourself into thinking it's a growth mindset. So a bit of a challenge to myself or anyone in that instance to maybe take a step back and really get to the why of it before saying, this is the thing. If it's not being mirrored in a partner, it's a negative. Well, maybe we both have some work to do to decide, how are we defining these things in the first place?
I love that. I'm glad that you brought up mimetic desire, by the way. And you describe it in the book. It's like if you break up with your boyfriend and then you get with someone else, the guy, your ex-boyfriend, now wants you because they see you with someone else.
Right.
So explain what's going on. And then this is a very common thing. And I'm, again, just going to put myself as the example. I used to think, oh, well, I knew he loved me, but actually I was blinding myself to the fact that it was just mimetic desire and not actually that he wanted me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, mimetic desire or mimetic theory is really interesting. Obviously not my own. Rene Girard is like the grandfather of it. There's a great book called Wanting by Luke Burgess, which like really dives into the whole thing. But the genesis of it was with this Professor Girard, who was this, great academic in the 1700s, 1800s, 1900s, somewhere in there, basically talking about he was in a relationship with this woman, and then he was young and kind of an F-boy for all measures, and decided he wanted to play the field a bit more, and he broke up with her, and then he saw her out and about with another boyfriend, and she looked so happy, and they were great together, and then all of a sudden he found himself wanting to get back together with her, And his theory from that was the reason that he wanted to get back was he had seen a model of what he should want. That is a happy, healthy relationship. And it was a model to him about why he should want that. And he broke it all down in different ways. And he's basically spent the rest of his days as an academic looking at this idea of basically social copycat in every industry, from the things that we buy to the way that we view life, to the relationships, to consumerism, to advertising, and that there's very little in life that we have decided we want that hasn't been conditioned in a sense, in a kind of keeping up with the Joneses kind of way, and that everything has been modeled to us in a sense. Buy this, look this way, get this feeling. This is the relationship you should want, and so on and so forth. And I think it's a really interesting point, of course, because nothing in life is devoid of inspiration in some sense, and I think balance is good. I think it's great to be inspired by other people. Of course, you have to, be inspired in some sense. It's very few people create from absolute zero. We're all inspired in different ways. But I like it as a proof point that anytime I feel compelled to do something that I don't really know why I'm doing it, I come back to this point of pause and say, well, perhaps this is something that has been modeled to me by a parent, by an ex, by a friend, by the media, by social media, whatever it is. Maybe I can take pause and push back on this thing instead of just buying in blindly into a timeline, a belief, a standard, a boundary. Talk about picky when we first opened. A lot of those picky things maybe, didn't mean much to us, but we were borrowing it. The silliest example I always give is that there are some women, genuinely, and I have respect for them, who want their boyfriend to post them as their Woman Crush Wednesday on social media. And if the guy doesn't, they're genuinely upset because they see that as proof that their relationship is healthy. And then there are other women who think it's the most absurd thing in the world. So just the point of two different things. And I think about, we all could have a broad spectrum of wants and needs. And I like that as an example of some people buy into it, some people don't. And I think that's how we should approach really every desire in life, not to be that annoying, cynical person who's like, why, or like whatever, but just like the challenge of things that we feel compelled to do in order to deliver a certain outcome. I think is so powerful, because I think we'd be remiss to think that we've decided what we want completely in life. I think as we get older, certainly we've let go of a lot of the things that we've been carrying with us. Like, I can't believe I wanted that for so long, or I can't believe I was validated by this, that, and the other. But I think 20s, 30s, I think we're very quick to be borrowing these things. And that's the essence of life. You borrow, you try it, and you let go. But some things we're holding on to. I think the big things, of course, would be money as validation, partnership status as validation, and certain accolades and superficial things like that. But I really am drawn to that idea of, why do we want what we want? Have we sat down and decided why we want it? That's my favorite word in the world, is why. If you could truly ask yourself why at multiple levels and get to the bottom of something, I think you have a lot of, very cathartic conversations with yourself where you actually do change. But I think coming back to the idea of, just recognizing that maybe there's some things in your life that you've been blindly chasing that aren't true to you, that could be the thing you need to change.
I love that. And writing down your whys of why you value things is actually really beautiful. Great way of people really assessing, because I think our natural instinct is to beat ourselves up, right? Like, oh, I can't believe it. Like, I can't believe I fell for that. Or it's like, well, instead of beating yourself up, just say, oh, these are what I think I value. And now let me question them and see if they actually align with my true essence. I don't necessarily use that word much, but, and as you were talking as well, I do think, to your point, that we look at other people and we go, oh, that must be valuable. And I'm just going to be honest. I'm just going to be transparent, right? I have done this when I was in my teenage years. I dumped a boy. I was like 16. Brutal. I know, it's so horrible. I dumped a boy. And 16, it was the language we used. And then he went out with one of the popular girls in school. Yeah. And I was like, oh my God, what have I done? Because she was popular. She goes out with him. And so now I started what did I miss? Because I thought that the popular girl had better, a better value system than I did. So I must now oh shit. And then I started regretting it. And I shouldn't have dumped him and all of this story.
Yeah. I think building on the idea of mimetic theory and desire, there's a lot to be said about then the role that conformity and pressure plays on that. I had another chapter in there about this guy named Solomon Asch. He was the founding father of conformity study, a very niche academic field, but really interesting stuff in the 50s to prove the influence that social pressure has on people. And he did this really simple experiment. I'll probably butcher it, but basically he put a bunch of people in a room where everyone was in on it except for one person. And they were trying to gauge this one person to see how they reacted to other people's answers. And basically what they did, they had a room with, call it 10 people, 9 of which were these Confederates and 1 was the true study. And he basically showed them 3 lines, just like little straight lines of different length. And then drew a third one. And he was like, which line is that most similar to of the other ones? And it was a blatantly obvious answer, right? They were all certain length. And he was, which one is it most similar to? And he had the one person answer last. So that person had to see every single answer that all the Confederates answered. And he had the Confederates give wrong answers until it finally got to that last person. And then like 75% of the case, the person just followed suit, even though it was obviously wrong. They were like, yeah, that book's green. Yep, it's green. And he did this just to prove the power of social conformity. And it was really interesting stuff because, you know, for one, that's the power of numbers, right? You got enough people in a room saying one thing, you're going to follow suit because you don't want to be wrong. And afterwards, he would survey them. Like, why would you say that? And they would either say they didn't want to be wrong, they didn't want to be embarrassed, or to your point, they assumed that the other people knew something they didn't know. Like, well, he's like, and maybe it was green. Maybe I'm colorblind all of a sudden in this instance. And they convinced themselves of that. So like really interesting ways that we can question our decisions based on larger group think, or just, you know, assuming that because someone else, for instance, someone else looks happy, that person looks happy on Instagram. So therefore they have something that I need to mimic their life. Or a lot of people own a certain shoe. Well, that shoe must offer them something that I need. They must be aware of something, or investment strategy, or whatever is hot topic of the day. I think you combine mimetic theory and conformity plus our own robot mode. It's kind of a melting pot of challenges. Yeah. But really the only way to challenge a challenge is to be aware of it, I suppose. So that's why I included a chapter in there. And for me, it's like, I'm always just trying to like, why do I want this thing? Why am I doing this thing? Am I doing it for them? Where did this come from? And then I hit why, and it's helpful.
It really hit me, and I love that part of the book because being Greek Orthodox, I think when it comes to expectations with religion or with family, it really does align with everything you just said, right? The conformity, the like everyone pointing at the short line when you're like, I think it's the long one. Yeah. You know, the 70%, like when you're in a very religious family and everyone around you is going to church and they're praying and everything, and then you're the one that's sitting there maybe saying like, I don't know if I believe in God, right? Like, obviously, that's the religious side of it. But even let's go back to relationships. If you're in, you know, a family that, in fact, my own, everyone marries Greek Orthodox. It's like, that was just the thing. And I brought Tom into the family who's, you know, hadn't been christened. And so everybody was like, he's not your type, and he's not, you guys aren't going to last. And every time I would ask someone in my family why, it's like, because you guys can't relate to each other. So it was everyone else's expectations of what they thought the value system is in a relationship, and the fact that if you come from different places, then surely you can't value each other. And so that became their value system.
Yeah, I think we'd be remiss to also not place a lot of emphasis on the role that family, close family, distant family plays in everything we're talking about here. And it's easy to be like, oh, social media and you know, people from college or whatever, but like family plays a huge role in establishing those things from early on. I mean, it's a reason why, you know, therapists, basically their sole job is to break down conditioning. And conditioning comes early on in childhood and adolescence, and how you're baked in to respond to the world. Like, where does your natural appetite come from? Like, how do you respond to drama? All these different things comes from that. And if you have, you know, parents for generations that have, you know, bought into certain things in a healthy way, perhaps, or not, it's very difficult to break free from that, much less than break free from the conformity that comes from just the greater society. So there's a lot of unlearning to be had, and I think perhaps that's the real value of journaling and therapy. It's not, again, I'm really passionate about this topic. It's not always about more and better. It's about unlearning. It's about unburdening. It's about simpler. It could be about completely different. But I think sometimes we're very bullheaded and we double down on these things, whereas maybe we don't need to. And I think that could be really liberating.
I love the unlearning part. I wish I had the quote at hand, but in your book you say something like, don't let ex-boyfriends like dictate your worth. Don't let family dictate your worth. Don't let business, colleagues, like bosses dictate your worth. And so like the unwiring or the unlearning where we get into a relationship, whether it's partner, business, family, and then we have an idea, we work hard at it, but over time, other people start to erode that feeling or that credibility that we've tried to build within ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, we're very quick to kind of outsource our needs, outsource our feelings to other people. I think the quote that I have, one of the quotes I wrote that was really popular was, life changes for the better when we prioritize how our life feels to us instead of how it looks to other people. And I think if we were to get real honest with ourselves, we do a lot of things, like literal actions, in order to look good to other people, to look good on paper, whether or not people are even looking at us. Like, we've developed this whole ethos where everyone's looking at us and cares about us. And it's just, we do these things out of that. And I think a true compassionate, free, most importantly, free life is one where we're doing things because it feels rewarding to us. And not in like a hedonistic, going all in way, but like reprioritizing, why are we doing the things we're doing? Are we doing them to look good on paper to other people and then hope that a personal feeling of fulfillment comes from that? Or are we doing things because it feels good to us and honors our truth? That's always a word that I've struggled with. What does our truth mean? I mean, that's just literal radical honesty that's backed by why. Are our actions following that? Or are they following some larger, system of attention or influence or impressing other people? I think that's the question we have to answer, and it could take a long time, I suppose, to come up with a system that helps you break free. But I think at least recognizing that there's a difference between actions that look good to other people and that feel good to you. It's great to find the sweet spot where it's one and the same, but that could take a while.
Yeah,
too.
just know which one your North Star is, though, right?
At least have taken time to determine that you have a North Star. Because the whole book and like everything that I do is just about this idea of being in the gray of life. I started the podcast in 2018, like 5 years ago. And it was just because I felt like I was living in the gray, dating people just to date, working this job just to have a job, but also to define myself by being a good salesperson, all these things. And I was like, man, it would be really frustrating to look back and regret these paths that I kept going down for so long, kind of adrift, and just hoping that one day someone or something or some accolade will come along and say, hey, you've been doing the right thing, congrats. So I just really wanted to challenge myself to get out of the gray, to get out of ambiguity, to not have I call it a defeatist mentality, it is what it is kind of vibe, and just be more active and less passive in my life. And I think, how can I act? How can I speak more in alignment with these things as opposed to just thinking them? That I think is always going to deliver the outcome that grows you, or that introduces you to bigger, to better, or different, or simpler.
Click here to learn the 3 boundaries every woman must absolutely set in a relationship.
Other people don't need to understand or agree with your boundary in order to respect it. She may make you try to feel bad for setting the boundary and being the difficult one, but that is just a manipulative tactic to take